Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Ghost in the Machine in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 46, E-Triage. Commencing system check. Memory unit, green. Initializing tactics log. Loading geographic data. Vitals, yellow. Remaining MP, 14%. Black box temperature, high. Black box internal pressure, normal. 9s. 9s, please. Activating IFF. Activating FCS. Failed. Initializing pod connection. Failed. Initializing pod connection. Failed. Initializing pod connection. Failed. Initializing pod connection. Launching DBU setup. Activating inertia control system. Activating environmental sensors. Is this all the staunching gel we have, Alphys? Equipment status, red. Boot process aborted. Running disk integrity check. IIVE got this, 2B. Hold on. Override password. Forced safe boot engaged. YoRHa number 9 type S safe mode online _ 9's almost didn't expect to wake up. But somehow, he managed to crack open his eyes, just barely long enough to see an indistinct, subtly shifting pattern of large gray blocks. He counted his blessings he was alive. After what he'd gone through, he'd thought for sure he was going to die. And, it would have been okay to die with 2B standing over. Wait, no. Why on earth had he thought that? Had he been delirious from the pain? It wouldn't have been okay to die by 2B's side. It would have hurt her so much. He was alive. That was good. He was stuck in safe mode. Couldn't see anything. Could barely hear anything. That was less good. Safe mode, huh? He thought. That explains the gray. My video codecs aren't communicating properly with my visual systems. He tried to move and couldn't. That made sense, his motor systems wouldn't be functional in safe mode, either. Well, stuck in safe mode was better than inoperable, and he could probably hack his own systems to remove whatever corruption was preventing him from rebooting properly now that his body was filled with numb, tingly static instead of excruciating pain. Then again, once he did that, his body would be filled with excruciating pain instead of numb, tingly static. 9s. 2B's voice emitted from one of the gray blobs of oversized pixels, about as low fidelity as her appearance but still music to 9's ears. 16 kilobytes per second and ravaged by compression artifacts, but music nonetheless. He's awake, she observed to Alphys. Can he hear me? Why yeah, not very well, but yeah. 9s, are you alright? 2B laid a hand on 9's forehead, or what was probably a hand, and ran her fingers through his hair and across his scalp. Or, at least, 9s thought that's what she was doing. He couldn't actually feel it, just vague impressions, with his brain filling in a scant few of the blanks. Oh. He couldn't just wallow here in safe mode, after all. I'm fine, he wanted to say, but his vocal processors were offline. He can't talk, Alphys added. 9s blinked. Oh. He can blink, though. Alphys noticed. 9s, if you have anything, important to say, blink once for A, twice for B, 3 times for C, F. How'd you learn to reboot him in safe mode? 2B asked. Oh, he taught me. We tried to do it to you, but, well. I see. So he's conscious. Pod 153 chimed in. Analysis, Unit 9's self-hacking module is functional. Proposal, Unit 9's should assess any damage to internal systems and reboot into normal mode, if possible. 9's gathered his thoughts and dove into his systems. 2B had held herself together when she'd reached 9's and swaddled his bleeding body in her coat. She'd held herself together when she'd all but kicked the door to the Royal Laboratory down. She'd held herself together while she and Alphys had gathered all the tools at their disposal to stabilize him, keeping a vigil kneeling at his side while trying not to feel helpless. 9's was good at maintenance, at least for a Type S, but 2B didn't have such experience. She knew more about how androids worked than most androids, but only to more efficiently execute them, not to repair them. With the fall of YoRHa, The only two people in the world 2B knew of who knew how to maintain and repair damaged androids were right here, one unconscious and clinging to life, the other fumbling through a toolbox. She had to trust Alphys to patch the puncture wounds running across 9S's chest, seal the larger fractures in his chassis, because 9S. To say he looked horrible would have been an understatement. Lying so limply on a bed made from 2B's coat and the tattered remains of his own clothing, the scars marring his skin hardening his once soft and boyish face, grime smeared over his ashen skin, long red claw marks cutting into his muscles and scraping the hard endodermis beneath. 3 parallel furrows ran from the right side of his chin to his left temple, splitting his lips and running across the bridge of his nose, his left eye fortunate enough to occupy the space between 2 of the lacerations and remain unscathed. 9's looked more than horrible, he looked mangled and broken. When his eyes had opened still soft, pale blue's 2B's black box had stopped for just a moment. At least, that was what it had felt like. Nevertheless, she'd kept her composure, managed her expectations, stifled both her optimism and pessimism as they dueled within her. But then, after what had felt like an eternity waiting with bated breath, 9S's hand had moved. And he'd lifted his head, and wrapped his fingers stiff and uncooperative as they were around 2B's wrist. And that had been enough. She smiled and broke down, crying tears of relief into his shoulder, cradling the back of his head in her hand, her fingers running through his hair. Wrapped up in her arms, 9's shivered and pulled himself closer with a weak and shaking arm, his cheek nestled in her hair, his tears dampening her silver-white locks. 2B kept her grip as gentle as she could, though in her relief she just wanted to hug him to pieces. She'd almost lost him. She'd come so close this time to losing him, just like she'd lost him before. A single second, a single fraction of a second. What had she done? How had she done it? How had she pulled 9's out of the yawning abyss he'd thrown himself into? How had she made it in time? 2B. Alphys patted her on the shoulder. It's okay, why you don't have to. He's okay, see. 2B, what's wrong? 60 asked, her voice soft against 2B's ear. You did it. It's okay. 9's began to whimper, fearing she was hurting him. 2B loosened her grip and laid him down on the floor, once again laying out in full view all of the damage he'd endured even as the lacerations splitting him apart began to close. The tears leaking out from under her visor and rolling down her cheeks dripped onto his face, mingling with his own tears and the shiny glaze of staunching gel coating his wounds. Her tears weren't just tears of relief and joy now it hurt to breathe for a different reason, the weight pressing against her chest born of melancholy. If only she'd just woken up a day sooner, just a day. 2B, it's okay, 60 repeated. 9S looks fine. He'll be fine. You got to him in time. 9's reached out and caressed 2B's face, the curve of his soft palm and gentle arc of his fingers matching the curve of her cheek, and a weak and bittersweet smile played across his face, coaxing more blood to well up from his split lip and stain his white teeth scarlet. How long have I been out? He asked, his voice cracked and trembling, just a little above a whisper. 6 more weeks? Or months? 20 minutes, Alphys answered, glancing at her wristwatch. Damn. You work fast, document. 9 sat up, grasping 2B's shoulder for support. She laid her hands on his sides and kept him steady. I'm sorry. I should have been there for you when you woke up. I was stupid, reckless. I've caused so many problems. SHH. Save it for later, said 2B. Now isn't the time to let those thoughts trouble you. Yes, how could I forget one of your HA's most important rules, 9 sniffled. Angst is prohibited. He gave 2B another one-armed hug, collapsing into her embrace and sobbing. I've made quite a mess, he said, panting out his words between labored breaths, haven't I? I'd really like to take a long, hot bath, put on a fresh set of PJs, and curl up under a thick, warm, fluffy blanket. We can do that, 2B assured him. We can do that. 2B, Alphys checked her laptop, a pang of worry entering her voice. I hate to kick you guys out, but if you think 9's is well enough for you to carry him out of here, you'd, better do it pronto. It looks like a couple guards are coming this way. If they saw you coming in this direction, They'll have reasonable suspicion to search this place. 2B eyed the ragged coat lying on the tiled floor and the scarlet android blood staining the grout between the tiles and felt her black box sink deeper into her chest. I can clean that up before they get here, Alphys said, but you guys should head into the basement. Take the corridor to Waterfall as soon as you can. She skittered over to the elevator, keying in the proper code to summon the lift and open the doors with trembling fingers. Why you'd, have to lay low this time, 2B, she added. Nines took a deep breath. I think I'm ready. The staunching gel smeared into and over his wounds had stopped the bleeding from his face and torso, and his skin was beginning to knit the deeper lacerations back together. Depending on how active the nano-machines in his bloodstream were in light of his condition, it could be only a few hours before those deep cuts almost like canyons gouged into his flesh would be reduced to tight seams that would eventually fade into scars. 2B stood up, helping Nines to his feet. His legs wobbled like a newborn fawn's, and when she saw how much trouble he was having standing up despite his renewed confidence, she hooked her arm under the crook of his knees and swept him off his feet. Analysis: Unit 9 is mildly dehydrated, Pod 153 observed. Proposal: procure at least 1 liter of water to offset the loss of blood and coolant and replenish levels of self-repair nano-machines. Take as much stuff as you need on the way out, Alphys said as the doors to the elevator slid open and she ushered the pair of androids toward it. As 2B passed by her, she reached out and grabbed her by the arm. Oh, and 2B? 2B stopped, one foot planted firmly on the platform. Yes. Alphys wrapped her arms around her waist and hugged her, resting her head against Nines as he lay curled up in 2B's arms. I am so happy for you too. And you, 2B. I'm so glad you're awake. We've all been going kinda crazy without you. Glad to be of service. 2B smiled, a certain nostalgic warmth bubbling up in her chest. Being hailed as saviors upon arrival was part and parcel of the Yoarha experience, and one of the few parts of being in that line of work that 2B actually missed at that. And while I'm here, Alphys, thanks for the sword. Why you like it? Alphys asked, her eyes brightening, tail wagging. It's the kind of weapon no one would think to invent except you. She gestured to the buckler as best she could with her hands full. Versatile, too. The shield design, in particular, is inspired. Alphys grinned. Thanks, 2B. It really comes together for the rest of the set. I was gonna, give you the rest of what I've finished, but we don't have time for that. I'm willing to wait, said 2B, remembering that Alphys had intended this sword, as well as the rest of the equipment that went along with it, as a birthday present. She stepped onto the elevator as Alphys made a beeline for a mop and bucket, and as the doors slid shut and the platform began its descent, 2B held Nines closer to her chest, lifted his head, and lightly nuzzled his cheek. I'm glad I found you in one piece, Nines, she murmured. Well, to be honest, Nines replied, eyeing the empty socket where his right shoulder had once been, I'm only still in one piece, because I'm pretty sure there isn't anything left of my arm. So, yeah. Technically. He rested his head against 2B's shoulder. The elevator came to a stop and once the doors had slid open, 2B stepped into the gloomy sub-basement of the lab. The lab was empty and eerily silent. While portions of it showed signs of recent use, many of its winding corridors hadn't been set foot in over the past 10 months and still bore telltale signs on the walls and floor of the harrowing battle that had taken place in here. The amalgamates no longer lived down here, they had been returned to their loved ones and, placated, no longer troubled anyone. The pods picked up a pallet of a dozen disposable plastic water bottles between the two of them. 2B set Nines on the floor, took one of the bottles, unscrewed the cap, and held the bottle to his lips. He took a few greedy gulps at first, depleting the bottle's contents by half, then winced in pain and resigned himself to sipping the rest. When he was finished, he threw the empty bottle aside and watched it bounce against the floor. I am sorry, he whimpered, lowering his head as his remaining hand rested in his lap. I need to confess something to you. While you were asleep, I had so much trouble dealing with the royal guards on my own that I know what you did. Oh. Nines curled up tighter, hiding his face in his shame. 2B wondered how her Type E subroutines must have affected him psychologically. And how had they affected his body? I could hear you, she said. Just snippets, here and there. And I'm so sorry I couldn't have woken up sooner. I said some things to you I'm not proud of. Nines shook his head. Like Alphys said, we all went kinda crazy without you. We should get going, he said, rising slowly and tentatively to his feet. Mom's gonna kill me when we get back, so we might as well get it over with. For what my opinion is worth, I think you've been punished enough. 2B held onto him and helped him up. Are you sure you can walk? She asked. Yeah. Besides, if we run into any trouble, I wouldn't want you to be too encumbered, said Nines. He walked with a pronounced limp. 2B noticed. She wrapped her left arm around his waist and led him forward through the lab. With 2B and Pod 042 holding him up, Nines stumbled deeper into Waterfall's tunnels, his joints protesting his every movement as stagnant water lapped at his boots. Veins of crystalline growths, glowing with slight luminescence, ran through the rocky walls and cast faint and soft violet lights on his pale, bruised skin. The ceiling was dotted with tiny diamonds, glittering under Pod 153's beacons like twinkling stars. The occasional machine corpse lay in the rocky corridors, some the victims of the psychic pressure of Alphys amalgamates, some felled through machine infighting, others bearing the telltale marks of 2B's own sword. He was glad to be with 2B again, so grateful to feel her strong arm wrapped around him, to see her so bright and alert after weeks of fruitlessly watching her still and corpse-like body. Having her at his side just made him feel so happy despite the deep and hurtful aches still racking his body. It was funny, in a way. Scanners were designed for solo work. 9S's partnership with 2B was an anomaly, unusual enough that he should have been suspicious of her true purpose right away. But the past month had shown clearly to him how unmoored he'd been without her, how dependent he'd grown on her. A part of him wondered if that was unhealthy. The two of them intended to follow the thoroughly mapped but mostly unoccupied tunnels running underneath the marshes. But a hastily erected Royal Guard barricade stood in their path, a sturdy and thickly layered wall of metal and piled-up rocks. Unable to cut down or blast through the obstruction, 2B and Nines had sought a detour into even deeper and darker tunnels and had soon fallen off the map. There was no sound but the steady and resonantly echoing drips of water droplets from the slick ceiling to the floor. Even machines had not delved so deep. This wasn't a part of Waterfall Nines recognized deeper than he'd ever gone before, deeper than he'd ever explored. Deep enough, shielded enough by such dense rocks and strange ores that Pod 153 and Pod 042 couldn't connect to Alphys' server or anything else. 2B repeatedly attempted to connect to both Alphys and 60 in vain. We should turn back, 2B suggested, pulling Nines aside. We might expect more resistance taking a higher road, but at least we won't get lost. Wait a minute. Nines was too tired to devote much energy to his usual curiosity, but couldn't help but wonder if, just as Pod 153 was unable to send a signal out, it also couldn't probe inward if this area had escaped even his most rigorous scans. If Chara knew about this place, could they have hidden their stockpile of black boxes here somewhere? I think there's something here. Something important. Oh, golly gee willikers, I'm flattered. It was a voice Nines had never expected to hear again. And in the strong light from Pod 153's floodlights, dangling from the tunnel's ceiling, water dripping down its slim and slender body and forming a puddle of brackish water on the floor below, was the ragged and wilting remains of a large golden flower. It was him again. Him. The creature that had torn his soul out. The creature who had made him feel and say and do such horrible things for no other reason than sick amusement. Pod. Nines cried out, stumbling backward, water splashing around his boots. 2B clutched him tighter as he fell back, pulling him closer to her side, but even her gentle touch couldn't soothe the fear that had seized him. Fire. Fire everything. Gunfire lit up the tunnel, light, an overwhelming sound bouncing off the slick walls. When the ringing cleared from 9S's ears, Floey had vanished. Ow. Gosh, you sure know how to greet an old. 042. 2B whirled around in the direction of Floey's voice. Kill this son of a. Hey, whoa. Hold on. Floey popped out of the ground and raised a pair of wilting, withered, browning leaves. Hold your fire. He let out a weak, somewhat forced-sounding cough. Why you wouldn't kill someone who's dying, would ya? Flowey looked near to death indeed, most of the petals ringing his cartoonish white face, curled and brittle and turning from gold to brown around the edges, seemed close to falling off, and several had been charred jet black. His face, too, was singed and disfigured. Nines wondered how the miserable creature had survived at all. Hadn't Pod 042 confirmed that Flowey's vital signs were no longer present? Or had Flowey somehow managed to escape out of the range of the pod's sensors in the nick of time? We might. Nines retorted, undeterred by Flowey's sorry state. I've changed. I'm turning over a new leaf. Flowey insisted, waving his leaves. I'm really. He let out a noise that seemed to be halfway between a sigh, a groan, and a death rattle. Sorry. Is that what you wanna hear? I'm sorry. Is it all water under the bridge now? Sorry. 9's legs stopped wobbling, because he was too angry now to feel exhausted anymore. Sorry. 2B seemed even angrier somehow, her normally stoic countenance twisted with rage. You ripped his soul from his fucking chest and goaded him into trying to kill me, and all you can say is, look, I'm not good at this, okay? But well, I regret what I did to you too. Flowey looked down at his roots. I was jealous. Jealous, Nines repeated, so incredulous that he forgot to tell Pod 153 to shoot at Flowey. Even 2B seemed dumbfounded. Yeah, turns out hatred, spitefulness, and jealousy are, like, the three feelings you're allowed to have when you don't have a soul. Which you of all people should know, Nines. Well, when 2B here in her stupid little floating computer blew me halfway to Kingdom Come, considering how lucky I was to slip away in the nick of time, I did some thinking. And? Nines asked. Well, first off, you know, hurting people isn't any fun, said Flowey, when they can hurt you back. Nines leaned against 2B. So all along, you've just been a garden variety bully. Watch it, friendo, Flowey snarled. Anyway, he let out a pained sigh. All this time, since you two fell into this wonderland, I've been, watching you two and the other Asriel, the fake one you cobbled together out of junk, and seeing you all being so cute and cuddly like real family members and having kind old Toriel dote on you 24/7 is like, well, it's like how me and Chara were. I'm jealous. I want that. I want that back. Nines let Flowey's words run through his head and tried to make sense of them. You want? Yeah. Okay. I want a soul, Flowey said, spitting the words out as if he couldn't wait to be rid of them. So I can be my stupid old self again. Okay, who do you think you're fooling? Nines retorted, not willing to fall even a little for the wounded animal routine Flowey was trying out on him. What, so you've had years of being the meanest kid on the playground, and now that you're not, you want everyone to think you've changed? You made me almost kill my... I didn't make you do anything. Flowey said. Sure, I suggested some things to you, but it was all you. Nines tried to say something cutting and cruel in response, but gagged on his own words. He knew Flowey was right. I'm sorry, again. There. I said it. Still, you remember what it's like to not have a soul, don't you, 9s? Flowey asked, shivering and curling up as Nines glared impotently down at him. It's the worst feeling in the world, and I'm sick of it. Nines had to admit, not having a soul was the worst thing in the world. I can't just give you a soul, he said. Wait, is that why you tried to steal my black box back then? Because you wanted mine. Flowey uncomfortably twiddled his shriveled, charred leaves, suddenly mute. Nines took that as an affirmative. 2B clutched 9's arm with a vice-like death grip and took a step in front of him as if to shield him with her body. You piece of... Life isn't fun anymore. Flowey cried out, his squeaking voice echoing across the tunnel walls. Trying to be all sappy and lovey just makes me feel empty, and being mean will get me killed, so nothing I can do or say will make me happy. Then how about I put you out of your misery? 2B spat. Pod 042 opened up, revealing its still smoking machine gun turrets. I don't wanna die. Flowey wailed. I don't want to live like this, But I don't wanna die, so, please, I'm begging you, 2B, Nines H help me. I'll do anything. It was sickening to Nines, hearing this monstrous flower who'd hurt him so much call him Nines. Anything? 2B asked. Flowey nodded. Anything. Die. Flowey screamed and vanished beneath the waterlogged mud as Pod 042 opened fire again. I just said I didn't wanna die, he protested from his hiding spot beneath the mud. I don't care. Fine. Flowey shouted. Stay by yourself. But you'll never find your way out of here without me. We're fine on our own, 2B insisted. Yeah. Nines added. Get lost before we finish what we started. I know my way through this kingdom like the back of my leaf, Flowey said, wiggling a pitifully wrinkled and half-burned leaf. Even this part down here. The part no one's ever cared enough to map out. Me and Chara spent so many afternoons making constellations out of the diamonds down here. Flowey and Chara both know this place. Wait. Nines shouted out as 2B unfolded the switchblade mounted on her forearm, grabbing her by the shoulder. Flowey, has Chara been down here recently? Flowey smiled. Perhaps the promise of a soul would jog my memory. You can't have his, 2B said, leveling her sword at Flowey. His? No, that wouldn't work at all. Our last encounter made that clear. You can't transplant souls. Flowey sighed. Easier to create one, I think. How do you expect us to do that? Nines asked. You're smart. Flowey shrugged. You'll find a way. Show us where Chara's been, Nines insisted. So we know you aren't just talking out your ass. First off, I don't have an ass. Well, I only saw them walk past here, Flowey said, but I have a good idea where they were coming from. Flowey began to trudge on ahead. Follow me. 2B glanced at Nines, frowning. She was right not to trust Flowey. But Nines had struggled so hard to find the 6 black boxes on his own only to come up empty-handed that he had no choice but to take a leap of faith. If he tries anything, Nines said, loudly enough that Flowey could definitely hear it, he dies. Alphys had just finished scrubbing the blood off the floor when the door buzzer rang. Gulping and double-checking to make sure she'd shoved 2B's coat and 9S's cast-off shirt in the incinerator, she waddled to the door, her pulse racing, and checked the outside camera. She breathed a sigh of relief to see Undyne there, alone, instead of a troop of armed guards, and without hesitation, opened the door. Alphys wasn't the most observant person in the world when it came to other people, as detail-oriented as she was when it came to her work. But she could tell right away that something was wrong with Undyne. She just looked beaten. But not the kind of beaten Undyne would usually look like. Sure, she didn't win every fight. She and 2B were just about evenly matched in their sparring contests, although 2B had recently pulled just a bit ahead. But Undyne was in no way a sore loser, and though she wasn't without her pride, she took her defeats with a grin. Undyne didn't say much as she made her way inside, shrugging out of her uniform, stripping down to her shorts and a tank top, and freeing her hair from its restrictive ponytail. She said hi to Alphys, patted her on the head, and went straight for the shower, which was probably for the best because her scales didn't seem to be glistening with just sweat. Our rough day, huh? Alphys asked, stumbling a little over her words, not quite sure, as always, what to say or how to say it, punctuating her attempt at small talk with a little nervous laugh. Nah, it's been great, Undyne said, a little bit of forced enthusiasm in her voice lending it a sardonic tone as she pulled off her eye patch and let it fall to the floor. I love it when people let me down. I've been pretty stressed out today, too. But there's good news. 2B's awake, and she and Nines are on their way back home. Undyne stiffened. Good, she said, not bothering to turn and look at Alphys. Why yeah. We've got the team all together now. Things are gonna get better, Alphys insisted. Things are gonna get better. Yeah. I know. Undyne finally turned around, laying a hand on Alphys' shoulder. Her hair, brilliant scarlet except for her snow-white bangs, obscured her left eye in lieu of her eye patch. Alphys felt a little better seeing the weak smile on her face. Sorry, Alfie. I'm a little messed up today. Yeah, Hard to play cops and robbers when everyone else is taking it seriously, huh? Alphys asked, knowing that it must have been so painful for her to act as a double agent, especially the night of all nights, especially since Nines had gotten a little carried away. Yeah, that sums it up. Undine held a hand to her forehead. Hang on, I gotta wash off. Undine only spent a few minutes in the shower, then came out dressed down for the night, her toweled dry hair, still darkened and sodden, clinging to her scales, her t-shirt taking on a little bit of the dampness from her skin. She was, of course, overwhelmingly pretty, and Alphys would have thought she'd be used to that by now, but her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of Undine's lean, curvy, muscular. Undine fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around Alphys, her damp cheek warm against Alphys, her lank and waterlogged hair cold. She'd have squeezed the breath out of Alphys' chest if the sight of Undine wasn't breathtaking enough on its own. Thanks for being here, Undine murmured into her ear. The weariness from not only Alphys' exhausting workday but also her night shift as 2BS remote support melted away as Alphys' heart skipped a beat and her head grew light. Ah, thanks for coming. You us girlfriends gotta, stick together. Alphys let her choice of words hang in the air. Had she really said, girlfriends? I meant girlfriends, she clarified, like, girls, and friends, because we're girls, and friends, and... Undine shut her up by pecking her on the cheek. Alphys, we've been dating for 9 months. It's okay. You can call me your girlfriend. Dating? Alphys sputtered, her brain short-circuiting as heat rushed to her cheeks. I thought we were just, hanging out. Seriously? Undine's smile widened. Seriously, Alphys? I mean, you said the word date a lot, but I thought you were just being ironic. Sure, Alphys had long since confessed her love to Undine, but she'd never quite brought herself to believe Undine felt the same way about her. Oh, yeah, I ironically took you out to dinner, and we ironically cuddled while watching sappy romance anime. I thought we were hanging out. I mean, there's nothing that says friends can't platonically. Undine buried her face in Alphys' shoulder, then stood up, taking Alphys with her. Her morose expression had all but vanished, replaced with a mirthful grin. Oh, Alphys, you absolute dork. Wanna watch cartoons until we pass out again? Alphys nodded, her feet and the tip of her happily flicking tail dangling above the floor, and Undine carried her to bed and sat her down, draping a blanket over the both of them and holding Alphys to her side. And then she just sat there. Floey led Nines and 2B to a large circular cavern, surprisingly well lit by luminescent crystals embedded in the walls. Chara and we spent a lot of time down here, he said, completely matter-of-factly, without a trace of the nostalgic wistfulness that might have been present in the voice of somebody with a soul. It was our secret place, and our secret place. He made his way to the far end of the cavern, where a sheet of smooth white limestone stood out from the craggy walls. Next to the conspicuous patch on the wall, an ancient and weathered upright piano stood, its wooden frame warped and streaked with moss and algae. Its ebony and ivory keys, though, were all polished and wiped clean. The piano had obviously been graced by a performance very recently. That's Chara for you, Floey said with a tinge of pride. They're so extra. That's a door, then? Nines asked, pointing to the limestone. And that piano's the key? It most certainly is. How clever of you. Floey hopped onto the stool in front of the piano and pressed a leaf on one of the keys and a loud, clear, resonant bell tone rang out. Instead of striking a string, the hammer connected to the key must have hit a sheet of metal instead, more like a giant music box than a piano. One merely presses the right notes in the right order, and... Can you play it? 2B asked, crossing her arms. Of course I can. Floey played a major scale on the keyboard, an ascending and descending series of bright, bell-like tones hanging in the air. I had it on the tip of my tongue, he whistled a few aimless notes. But I am having such a hard time remembering it. Perhaps a soul would jog my memory. Floey, 2B hissed, irritated. Oh. That's right. Floey's head swayed in the air happily. You promised me a soul in exchange for guiding you two out of here. If you want the melody now, well, that's a whole separate exchange. What else can you offer me? A swift death, to be offered. Instead of plucking your leaves and petals off one by one. Now. We're all trying to help each other. How about a big ceramic pot with some nice fertilizer? Nines asked. Floey's eyes lit up. Oh, that sounds just heavenly. Okay, so what's the melody? 2B asked. I'm not singing, Floey said, crossing his leaves just as 2B was crossing her arms, until I get my pot of dirt. After all, how sure can I be you won't double-cross me? Sounds like someone's projecting, Nines muttered, although he had to admit that 2B would kill him at the drop of a hat, so Floey wasn't exactly wrong. All right, he growled at Floey, but if you... Oh, please, I wouldn't dream of double-crossing you. I don't think I could take another laser to the face at this point. Remember, 2B here took away my resets, so if I die, well, that's it. Floey gave Nines a sardonic smile. All right, come this way. He trudged back through the shallow water blanketing the ground. Observation, Floey has given units 2B and Nines no reason to accept a beneficial partnership, Pod 153 offered. Nines, 2B whispered, resting his head against her shoulder. After what he did to us. If he double-crosses us, we'll kill him. Nines could tell that 2B still had reservations, but she sighed and helped him follow in Floey's wake. He joined her, but stumbled and felt his knees buckle, reaching out and snatching her arm for support, his curled fingers catching on the edge of the metal buckler on her forearm. Well, he thought, there goes the rest of me. 2B. I think I'm ready for you to carry me now, he mumbled as she supported his weight. Nines felt his world turn upside down as 2B slung him over her shoulder. Take it easy, Nines, she told him. You've had a long day. Thanks, 2B. Wake me if you need me. He closed his eyes and let the motion of 2B's stride rock him to sleep. Undyne? What do you wanna watch tonight? Alphys asked. We can't finish up Tetsu no Hana without 6-0, so maybe just put on Mew Mew K. Undyne's hand ran over Alphys' dry scales and tightened around her shoulder, squeezing the words out of her mouth. Alphys' train of thought slowed to a crawl as heat spread down her chest. Undyne was holding Alphys much closer now, pinning Alphys' cheek against her chest while her free hand cradled her chin. Undyne, I gotta get up to put the SH show on. You know. I'm kinda not in the mood to watch cartoons tonight, Undyne murmured. Not in the mood? But Undyne was always up to. Well, what do you wanna watch? Alphys asked. Undyne just held her tighter. Alphys felt like the luckiest stuffed animal in the world, but there was something a little unnerving about the way Undyne was cuddling her tonight. She seemed needier somehow, more vulnerable. I just feel really alone right now. Rough day. Rough enough to make Undyne like this? Alphys wondered. Another ultimatum from Chara, huh, she guessed. They're breathing D down my neck, too. The mobile armor project they want that, ready for deployment in 3 days or they'll, execute you for treason. And I had such a close shave today. One of the engineers came up to me asking why the collars of the Yorha armor had such little armor, she added, and I had to bullshit an excuse on the fly. I was so scared, but it felt so exciting to pull it off and also, one of the P programmers nearly found the backdoor in the revisor system, and... Alphys. Why yeah, Undyne. Was she babbling again? Sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize. Nah, it's okay. Undyne sighed. It's just that, for once, I'm not certain I'm doing the right thing. I mean, yeah, you undermining our own work for the greater good is just, Alphys shrugged. It was exciting, exhilarating, but she had to admit that it always felt wrong to sabotage her own work on purpose instead of just letting her self-loathing do it unconsciously for her. It feels weird. Not like that. I mean, are we being selfish? Undyne asked. We're helping our friends and not die, Alphys said, so, no. This was a strange line of inquiry for Undyne. Was Chara getting under her skin? Would it be insensitive for her to ask that? Undyne laughed. It was forced and unconvincing. Yeah. And that's what matters. Looking out for our friends. She made a fist and shook it in the air. Thanks, Alfie. You're always there to get my head on straight. That sounded almost like a joke coming from Undyne. So much of a joke, Alphys almost laughed out loud. And no, that's your job, she teased her. After all, it was Undyne who'd stuck with Alphys through her lowest points. Undyne was the perfect image of confidence, the very best friend and companion a girl like her could ask her. Well, I can't do it on my own anymore, Undyne said, laying her head on Alphys' shoulder, one hand scratching at the scales on the back of her neck. I've got to look at hiring an assistant to handle the workload. Oh, do I need to show you my resume? Alphys giggled. I'm serious. What's the pay like? And the benefits? Healthcare? Vacation days? No health plan, but free gym membership. Undyne cackled, evidently no longer serious. No, Alphys squirmed as Undyne's grip around her tightened. I am bad at that stuff. And as for vacation days, Undyne flipped Alphys on her back like a turtle and loomed over her, a wild, toothsome, and sharkish grin on her face. Alphys' breath caught in her throat. Mainly because Undyne's mouth was in the way. Their teeth clinked together. So that was a real kiss, then. Alphys had always read in the trashy romance manga and light novels she'd unearthed over the years that there was tongue involved, but not teeth. Where was? Oh. There was the tongue. After what felt like an eternity, Undyne pulled away and flopped onto the floor next to Alphys. How's that, for a vacation? Alphys still needed a few seconds to start breathing again. I'll take the job, she panted, her cheeks hot and red, her forehead flushed, her chest heaving. When do I start? Undyne shifted positions, resting her head on Alphys' stomach like it was a pillow. You just did. Oh, Alphys. Don't ever change. Ah. Alphys buried a hand in Undyne's hair, twirling her locks around her fingers. Just F for you, Undyne, am my queen, I won't. So, to be asked Flowey. Any reason why you're not going to Chara for help? I kinda burned my bridges with them, said Flowey. You know, I always thought Chara was the baddest of the bad. When good things stopped making me feel good, you know, because I was missing my soul, the very culmination of my being, I decided to try and be like them instead. But then, when they came back to life, they got all huggy and kissy and, oh, I missed you so much, with my old mother. It was such a pathetic display, I nearly gagged. My badass robot sibling reduced to that. But now you want a soul so you can be all huggy. 2B let her voice drip with suspicion. Yeah, I was wrong, okay? Gosh, you're just pulling these apologies out of me, it's disgusting. Flowey pouted for a bit as he led 2B further through the unmapped tunnels. Anyway, I took the whole thing poorly, one thing led to another, Chara, died, I guess, and, well. Flowey let out a long sigh like a deflating balloon. Chara hates when people betray them, or heck, just when people let them down. They don't, what's the word? Ah, right. Forgive. Their entire personality basically amounts to 3 grudges standing on each other's shoulders, wearing a trench coat. So, Flowey concluded, I'm hoping you might be a little more, you know. Less likely to shoot me in the face. We'll see, 2B grumbled. Speaking of our interactions, Flowey said. You've gone a long time without, you know, messing with time. 2B said nothing. I mean, 10 months without a reset. Wow. I went for stretches that long too, once. But eventually, the more bored I got, the less interested I was in letting things linger. People, relationships, eventually, you've seen all they have to offer. The early months, when I'd just started out, I tried to make people happy. I got everyone hooked up. Toriel got back together with Ascari. Undyne and Alphys got married. Papyrus and Met-Aten got everything they wanted: fame, glory, prestige, but then things just got boring. So I started having fun, really messing with people. Turned out, it was way more satisfying to see everyone at each other's throats instead of locking lips. But I got less and less patient, and soon, I was resetting every week. Every day. That was right. Floey had mentioned in one of his first encounters with 2B that he'd had the ability she now had. Just when I was getting bored with even the endless possibilities stretched out before me, you came along and made things so interesting. I was fascinated by how much you agonized over using the very power I had used with such gusto. A voice rang out in 2B's head. It has felt like a curse to you only because you have used your determination purely out of desperation. You have never honed it as you hone your blade. You have never studied how to anchor yourself in the river of time and command its eddies and whirls around you. You know, I set 6E free that night and sent her after Toriel to punish Chara for their sentimentality, Floey said, as casual as could be. But it was so interesting to see how it affected you. The anguish, the 2B felt her hands curling into a fist, fingernails digging into her palms. This creature was taunting her. Again. She could no longer contain herself. Pod, she spat through gritted teeth, kill him. Pod 042 opened fire. I gave you a gift unwillingly, but still, and there you were, boohooing about having the godlike power to change the world. Floey shouted out, skittering out of the pod's line of fire. Keep firing, 2B ordered her pod. I can teach you. 2B ordered the pod to stop firing. You can. Why yeah. Floey vigorously nodded. It can be our third trade. I lead you home, you get me a soul, you get me a nice pot, I give you the notes for that piano, and you spare my life, I teach you how to make that determination work for you. 2B wasn't sure how to respond to that. Don't you believe, asked Floey, staring up at her with wide eyes, looking for once vulnerable, that even the worst person can change? That even the most unforgivable things you've done can just become part of your past instead of controlling your future. You're manipulating me, 2B concluded. I'm empathizing with you, Floey retorted. That's what people with souls are supposed to do, right? Just, give me a chance. I'm sick of this, unlife. I'm sick of manipulating. I want to find joy in something else, like a hug, or a cool breeze on a hot day, or seeing the dumb smile on someone's stupid face when you do something to make their dull, meaningless lives just a little less dull. And I thought that if I did things for you and your dear brother that were supposed to help you, you'd, well, give it to me. You're unbelievable, 2B spat. Well, fine. Floey went off alone, vanishing into the darkness up ahead. The echoes bouncing off the walls grew stronger as his voice grew fainter. Find your way back to dear old mommy who used to be my mommy, you know, on your own. Figure out Chara's favorite song on your own. Learn how to make the flow of time itself your slave on your own. See if I care. 2B shrugged. Okay, she said, and with nines still slung over her shoulder, she continued on her own, and sooner than she expected, whatever veins of strange magnetic ores ran through the rocks down here began to grow thinner, sparse enough that they could no longer block Pod 042's probing signals. As the map on 2B's HUD lit up and Pod 042 began to trace the shortest route home, she smiled and patted Nines on the back. We're almost there, Nines. Rest easy. Chapter 47, E-Premonition. Nines stood with his back to Undyne, his dark coat hanging loose on his narrow shoulders, the hem brushing the ground. He looked like a kid dressed up in his dad's clothes, not a murderer. Why did you do it? Undyne asked him, venom lacing her voice, spit flying from the gaps between gritted fangs. Her hands curled into fists so tightly that her fingernails pierced her skin, slid into the gaps between scales, and drew blood. He said nothing, did nothing. Stood there, head lowered, framed by a narrow doorway, bathed in shadow. On the other side of the doorway was light, behind him, shadow, his own shadow stretching out behind him and lapping at Undyne's boots. Where the shadow touched, the leather turned crimson. Undyne stepped forward. Answer me, 9S. Her footsteps splashed. Answer me. She clamped a hand down on his shoulder and turned him around. What do you have to say for yourself, 9S? The entire front of his long black coat was so covered in dust it looked white. Covering a scarred face that had once been boyish and pretty was a grimy coating of blood and dust, mixed into an almost pinkish paste. His grin was manic, his teeth sharp, his eyes wide and red, bright red, hellish red. Though those eyes were fiery, they turned Undyne's heart to ice. What have you done? Her gaze fell to the floor. To a scaly yellow hand, clawed fingers short and stubby, streaked with crimson blood. The bulk of the body lay beyond the doorway, obscured by 9SS body, but Undyne knew who it was. What have you done? She whispered. Nines glanced at Alfie's corpse and nudged the hand with his foot. It crumbled to dust. I was finished with your friends, he said, the first words out of his mouth, his voice nearly a whisper, so now I'm working through your lovers. Undyne struggled to draw breath. She'd have betrayed you anyway. No. Undyne screamed out, her voice ripping at the inside of her throat, a ragged screech that seemed to take everything out of her body and leave her hollow, punctuating the arc of her arm as her fist collided with 9SS nose. He tumbled backward, blood trailing from a nose that crumpled like tinfoil, his body breaking apart like dead leaves as it fell. The light from the doorway, unobstructed, bore down on Undyne, blazing white, casting a stark, long, black shadow across the blood-stained floor from the pile of dust that had once been. Sobbing, she crumpled to her knees, burying her hands in the dust, letting it trickle through her fingers. It was so cold. Alphys was so warm, but her dust was so cold, and Undyne brought handfuls of it to her face, smeared it against her scaly, tear-streaked cheeks, hoping against hope that maybe she could feel just a bit of that warmth again. Just like Ascari. Why? Ascari's dust had been spread while Undyne had still been helping the androids find shelter in the ruins. She'd missed the funeral. She'd only seen his death from afar and had lost her chance to say one last goodbye. The light dimmed, leaving Undyne alone with nothing keeping her company but dust and the sound of her own weeping. He was right. She'd have betrayed you anyway. A new voice rang out from behind, cold, assaulting Undyne's earphones like a bucket of ice had been upended over her head. She and father were cut from the same cloth, Chara said, their footsteps squelching against the puddle of blood pooling across the floor as they drew nearer, crouching down and laying their hands on top of Undyne's, their fingers curling over hers, upending her hands so she could see her ashen palms. I know this must be hard for you, Undyne. Beset on all sides by disloyalty, a captain, mutinied against by every member of her precious crew. No. Ascari betrayed you. Jerson betrayed you. Toriel betrayed you. They betrayed all of us, turned their backs on the best hope for this kingdom, to soothe their guilty consciences and justify their cowardice. Chara pressed closer, the weight of their chest on Undyne's back holding her down. And 2B and 9s betrayed you, too, Captain, Chara whispered. 9S broke his promise to you. He murdered people you have sparred with and shared drinks with comrades and brothers in arms. And 2B abandoned you, slept in peaceful repose like a princess in a fairy tale, when you needed her more than ever. No, no, no. How long will it take for Alphys to show you her yellow belly, too? Chara curled Undyne's fingers, balled her hands into fists, cupped her fists in their hands. How will she betray you? Or has she already? Undyne tore her hands away and pulled herself free, whirling around on unsteady legs, standing over Chara for a split second before falling to the ground again, her heart thumping furiously against her ribcage. Get away from me, she snarled. As they crouched down, Chara's violet robes pooled around them. Oh, Undyne. I can't. I'm your boss, first off, and, they crawled forward, padding on hands and knees with the gait of a wild predator until they were face to face with Undyne, their single red eye glittering, the petals of the flower covering what remained of their right eye just as lustrous. Ascari was my father. And he was like a father to you, too, right? They reached out, their long, pale fingers brushing the hair away from Undyne's left eye and lingering against her eye patch. That makes you my sister. Undyne's scream caught in her throat, her lungs frozen, the gills running along the sides of her neck gaping and flapping desperately for air. She tried to shrink away from Chara, but her body wouldn't move. We have a shared duty, Undyne. Adopted children of royalty, bound not by blood, but united with a common purpose. Chara tugged at the flower covering their eye and pulled it out, a long stem soaked with blood trailing behind it. A bloody tear crawled from the burned, empty socket down their rosy cheek. In your heart, you know I'm right. Stay with your friends and abandon everything you claim to stand for, just as father did, or stand with me, and save the world. Chara reached out, and the sharp, thorn-like end of the flower's stem pierced Undine's eye patch and slid into her eye with white-hot, excruciating pain. The scream that had lodged in her throat finally came forth, and she convulsed and writhed in agony as the cursed flower lodged itself in its new home. It felt as though the flesh was being torn from her bones, as though every drop of blood in her body had turned to acid, as though every part of her was trying to turn itself inside out. She lashed out with her legs in a desperate attempt to knock Chara back. Her foot struck something hard. Ow! Undine bolted awake, a thick blanket falling away from her chest as she sat up, fists clenched around the edges, nails digging into the fabric. Her shirt clung to her sweat-soaked back as she gasped and panted for air, reaching up to her eye to feel for the flower that, much to her relief, wasn't there. It was just a dream. It was only just a dream, she told herself, relieved, as her fingers ran a ring around her eye. Alphys, she called out. Ugh, ow, she moaned. Alphys. Undine rose up on her knees and surveyed the darkened laboratory, conjuring a spear of lightning to her hand and casting flickering aquamarine light across the floor. She found Alphys curled up on the floor not too far away with her hands clasped around the tip of her snout, a greenish pallor cast on her skin by the light from the spear, her blood appearing black as crude oil as it seeped between her fingers. Oh, God, Alphys. Undine knelt down next to her, laying her hand on her hands. Alphys, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Nightmare. Yeah, Alphys, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Undine pried Alphys' hands away from her bloodied snout. Let me take a look. She poked and prodded Alphys' snout, feeling the bone beneath and searching for any fractures. Much to her relief, there were none. I didn't mean to kick you, Undine insisted as she helped Alphys up and brought her to the bathroom to wash up. As her hands clasped Alphys' shoulders, Undine's heart ached, and she had to remind herself that what she was feeling, the soft, warm, dry, scaly skin, was real. Alphys was still here, still alive, and what Undine had just gone through had been nothing but her own subconscious tormenting her. I was having a really fucked up dream. No, I get it, Alphys muttered, still groggy, still clutching at her snout to stem the flow of blood. Remember the first sleepover we had with 2B? She had a nightmare, and punched you right in the face. Under the harsh fluorescent glare of the bathroom lights, the bleeding didn't look so bad, although the sight of that blood, so red, trickling down Alphys' chin sent a chill up Undine's spine and made her stomach do somersaults. Yeah, Undine said as she washed away the blood and held a wad of tissues to Alphys' nostrils. Yeah, that turned into one hell of a morning. Why you two are two of a kind, huh? Undine bristled instinctively at the comparison, then stifled that reaction. I'm not gonna let Chara get to me. Alphys was right. Looking out for your friends is the right thing to do, and 2B she's my friend. Nevertheless, she shuddered as she thought about what the casualty reports she'd see later this morning might look like. Alphys chuckled. You're as athletic asleep as you are awake. Is this gonna be a problem for us? Undine asked, nervously joining in on the laughter. Nah. I'll just wear a helmet to bed if you keep this up. Alphys said, rubbing at her bleary eyes. Ugh, what time is it? Undine shrugged. Early morning, probably. Don't feel like I've been sleeping for more than a few hours. She pulled the completely reddened wad of tissues away from Alphys' nose and tossed them in the waste bin. The bleeding, thankfully, had stopped, but Alphys' snout looked a little browned where Undine's heel had hit her, like a bruised banana. Does it still hurt? She asked. I think I'm fine, Alphys answered, sniffling a bit as she wrapped an arm around Undine's waist. Don't worry about me, Undine. I get it. If there's anything you wanna talk to me about, I mean, I've gotten all the sleep I'm gonna get for the next 18 hours, she looked up at Undine and flashed an exhausted smile. And, well, it's my job to help you out, so. Undine matched Alphys' smile with a toothy grin of her own, her chest still aching as she reached down, hugged her, and lifted her off the floor. Alphys was so warm, so soft, and squishy, and hugging her just made everything feel right, at least for a little bit. Alphys loves me more than anyone. She'll always stand by my side. I guess I owe you an explanation, she said, squeezing Alphys closer to her chest and carrying her to her bed. Taking a seat on the mattress, Undyne took a deep breath and recounted as much of her nightmare as she could to Alphys. Or, at least, as much as she felt comfortable retelling. Alphys cringed. Wow. Yeah, so, Undyne scratched at the back of her neck. When Chara attacked me, I tried to kick them away, and my leg must have moved in real life, too. Oh okay, so, first off, said Alphys, reaching for her glasses and sliding them up the bridge of her snout, I can't really psychoanalyze dreams or anything, so, maybe you should see a real therapist about some of this stuff. Undyne laughed at that. Trying to tell a therapist you were nervous about your friendship with notorious fugitives and your ongoing plot to kill your boss would not go over well, confidentiality be damned. Second. I think you should quit the Royal Guard. Undyne opened her mouth to say something and felt her mind go blank for a few seconds, leaving her mouth gaping open like a fish. I'm serious. Why you should march up to King Chara first thing this morning and resign. In fact, we should be both quit, Alphys continued, twiddling her thumbs nervously, her eyes darting back and forth behind her glasses. And we could run away to the ruins together. Tutorial after all, I mean, she's been living there for centuries and no one's found her, so we could. Alphys, Undyne gritted her teeth and sucked air through them. We can't run away. It's not running away. Alphys insisted. It's a tactical retreat. If we run away together, Chara won't have leverage over either of us anymore, and we'll be able to do whatever we want to oppose them. How long will it take for her to show you her yellow belly? How will she betray you? Exile, that's the coward's way out, Undyne said. It'd work. Toriel. The whole Dreamer family, Undyne retorted, the words slipping out almost before she could think them, was a bunch of cowards. Alphys had been about to say something, but paused, blinked, and bit her lip. Why you don't mean that? It's true. First Toriel, the Ascari. They both turned their backs on this kingdom when it needed them. Undyne balled her hands into fists. They betrayed us. They abandoned us. They strung us along with false promises and... How can you say that about Ascari? Alphys cried out, eyes widening, reeling backward in shock. Undyne, he was. Not you too. Undyne pounded her fist on the bed, possessed with a wild anger flaring up and coursing through her veins. Why did everyone whose opinion mattered to her act like Ascari hadn't been a craven, lying coward who'd never intended to make good on his promises to do right by his people, to perform his duties as king? In her heart, she knew that the most important thing was freeing the kingdom from its agonizing millennia of imprisonment, and why was Chara, Dreamer of all people, the only one who seemed to agree with her? Why did her worst enemy have to share her goal, while all her friends turned their backs on it? I thought I could trust you, I thought I could count on you to be on my side, she told Alphys. What side are you on? Alphys' words hung in the air. Undyne struggled to speak, tears springing to her eyes. She choked down her tears. Breaking down the barrier is the most important thing in the world to me. We'll all die if we stay down here. But 2B and 9S, they don't care about any of that. The barrier doesn't matter to them. They're from space. They could live down here happily with their perfect robot bodies for hundreds of years while the rest of us all suffocate to death. None of them even once thought about offering their souls to free us. And look at what Nines did. How can someone who's capable of that give a damn about how much our lives are worth? You Undyne, that's not true. They'll do whatever they can to help us. Why is Chara the only person who cares about the survival of our race? Undyne added. I want them dead more than anyone, but... She trailed off, hearing beneath her own shouting another sound. Alphys was crying. Undyne, stop, Alphys croaked, hiding her watery eyes with one hand while reaching out with the other and laying it over Undyne's arm. This isn't who you are. With a shuddering sob, Undyne collapsed into Alphys' embrace. The tears came as thick and as fast as blood from a mortal wound, her chest convulsing as cry after cry tore itself from her lungs. You need to quit, Alphys repeated, resting her head against Undyne's breast, the warmth from her cheek reaching Undyne's heart. Chara's G getting into your head, aren't they? Undyne nodded. Listen. Once we find out where Chara hid the black boxes, we'll be home free. We'll kill them, take their soul, and then everything will be fine. But what if? We've got to keep our faith, Alphys insisted. Besides, whatever anyone does to the androids, 2BLLJ just reset if things get really bad. Undyne recalled the offer 2B had made to her just before she'd fallen into that coma. When 2B had explained, calmly and clearly, the extent of her strange mastery over time, and had given Undyne the chance to invoke it. She remembered 2B taking her hands and guiding them, she remembered her fingers curling around the android's throat. Those icy gray-blue eyes had held such a deep and depressing sense of resignation. Like any good soldier, she hadn't wanted to die, but she'd been prepared to. Why had Undyne been so stupid? Why hadn't she just squeezed the life out of her and fixed everything? None of this had to have happened. Why had Undyne squandered her only opportunity to reverse every awful thing that had happened and prevent every awful thing yet to come? Because 2B had been her friend. And Undyne could never kill a friend, even for the greater good. It went against every instinct in her body. 2B was her friend. She had to keep hammering that into her head to make sure it stuck despite Chara's constant assault with their mind games and silver tongue. 2B was her friend. Look. You know we can't let anyone go after the androids anyway, Alphys added. And not even Nines, no matter how you feel about him now 2B's you untouchable, and 6-0, she's totally innocent, and she's fun. And all she's ever done wrong was just exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. Undyne nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. Ascari was right, Undyne. He wasn't a sea coward. Alphys patted Undyne on the cheek and ran her hand down her neck, stubby fingers brushing past sensitive gills. Undyne shivered and pressed Alphys closer. You understood that it was evil to kill innocent people, no matter how much good came out of it. And you're a hero of justice, you Undyne. What Chara wants might be the greater good, but it isn't justice. Undyne let out the rest of her pent-up emotions in a long, deflating sigh, quenching the last embers of her fiery anger. She fell onto her back, her head nearly dangling off the edge of the mattress, looking up at the dark ceiling. Justice, huh? I'm sorry, Alfie, she muttered, still fighting back the last dregs of her tears as she reached for her eye patch and slipped it on. It's okay. It's tough out here for all of us. Alphys fumbled for her phone, its bright screen harsh and glaring in the darkness. It's 5:30. When's your next shift, you Unday? Undyne snorted. What? Is said, when's your next shift? No, I heard that. It's at 6:30. Undyne sat up. What did you call me? You Unday. Alphys replied. You can't call me Unday. Undyne sputtered, feeling her cheeks grow hot. Why you call me Alfie? So I need a nickname for you too. You can't call me Unday. What about, Dinny? Alphys asked. Or Dines. Anything you want. Just not that. It feels weird and dirty. Undyne reached for her own phone and scrolled through her messages. Her inbox was about as chaotic as last night, in general, had been. Looking at all the emails on her phone's screen gave her a headache. Undyne wasn't sure if the messages were just nonsense or if she was too tired to read them properly, but apparently, a full 20% of the Royal Guard's active duty personnel were now missing at least 2 arms. No, that couldn't be right. Undyne groaned and tossed her phone to the floor. It was all enough to make her want to just go back to using Alphys' soft, squishy tummy as a pillow. In fact, sleeping the day away sounded like a pretty good idea now. But she wasn't unemployed just yet. Alphys stifled a yawn. She might not have been enduring the same sort of proximity to Chara Undyne currently was suffering through, but with all the pressures of her job on top of her double life as a saboteur, the poor girl only slept for 4 or 5 hours a night if she was lucky, and it showed. I guess I'd be better get to work. Boss wants the M-Mobile Armor project in full P-production in, she stifled another yawn, 3D days. How's that coming along? Alphys practically jumped off the bed, revitalized. Wanna see? Undyne shrugged. Sure. With stunning swiftness, Alphys grabbed Undyne by the arm and tugged her along, bringing her down from the loft and onto Alphys' laboratory floor and taking her to a sliding metal door tucked away into one of the walls. Behind it were two suits of mechanized armor, standing like mannequins modeling clothing in a department store. One was simply a suit of sleek Yoarha heavy armor, jet black with copper accents, a heavily modified backpack with short wings, sharp and sleek with a naked skeletal framework like the wings of a bat, was bolted onto it. The other suit had angular armor plating, gleaming bright blue and white under the lights, but was clearly a work in progress. The outer layers were a patchwork that mostly covered the chest, shoulders, forearms, and shins and left much of the black inner layer underneath, which was, Undyne noticed, another set of Yoarha armor clearly visible. So, Alphys started, beaming with pride, I started this project for your birthday. It's nanolaminate-coated armor over a standardized movable frame, and modular parts. Undyne smiled as Alphys continued to rattle off technical specifications. Half the words she was stammering made zero sense whatsoever, and Undyne was sure she'd made most of them up on the spot, but Undyne loved the enthusiasm with which she said them. You started working on this for my birthday. Undyne reached out and laid her hand on the brilliant blue chest armor. It was cool, smooth, and almost a little slick to the touch. The Magitech circulation system, Alphys went on, channels your magic through the suit and uses it to power the beam partisan, beam saber, and beam shield, along with any other parts you swap in, like the backpack from. She caught herself and realized that Undyne had spoken. Why yeah, she said, it was gonna be your next birthday present. With a nervous smile, she took a deep breath. Surprise! I love it. Undyne's hand slid across the glossy armor. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever gotten for me. It's not finished yet, Alphys said, which is why you can still sorta, see the inner frame, but I've done enough work to adapt it to the mass production models. Mass production? Undyne asked. Alphys, we can't hand this tech over to Chara. No. Alphys vigorously shook her head. And no, of course and not. Look, these suits are only part of the mobile armor project so I would have a cover to requisition the materials without anyone getting suspicious. But the real project isn't gonna use any of the good stuff, it's gonna be super cheap. No nanolaminate armor, no Magitech circulation system, the inner F-frame is gonna be, the kind with the weak neck armor we gave to the rest of the guard. Satisfied, Undyne patted Alphys on the head. Atta girl. She turned her attention to the other suit of armor, the barely adorned inner frame with the stubby wing pack on the back. The armor was very clearly too small for her. What's this one? Oh. That's, Alphys scuffed the floor a bit with her foot. That's for 2B's birthday. All I've finished is the flight pack and the heat saber, and she's got the saber now. Why does she get wings and I don't? Alphys wasted no time in replying. Why you'll have wings, too. I just haven't finished them yet. They'll be bigger, I promise, and I am thinking of making them into detachable, or remote controlled. You're not making one for 9 seconds, too, are you? Undyne crossed her arms. Obviously, if Alphys was still on friendly terms with him, she had every right to do something like that, but Undyne couldn't deny the idea made her more than just a little uncomfortable. Who knew how that crazy bastard would misuse something like this? No, I don't really think it's something he'd, want. Alphys sighed. Speaking of, I know it's pretty early in the morning, but, while you're still here, wanna call 2B and 9s and see if they're awake yet? Just, to check up on them. No. Not really. Well, I'm gonna. 9s was really messed up last night. Alphys shuffled over to her computer. Hope he didn't end up in a coma this time. I dunno. That'd make things a lot easier for all of us, Undyne grumbled. Incoming transmission from server node 1025 to support pod 042. Connection accepted. Server node 1025 to pod 042. Hi. How are 2B and 9s doing? Pod 042 to server node 1025. Response, Both units are currently conscious and undergoing minor repairs. Query: does Dr. Alphys require a more detailed report? Server node 1025 to pod 042. Great. Can we talk with them? Pod 042 to server node 1025. Response: this unit will forward your transmission to units 2B and 9s. Toriel's humble home was quite cramped now. When 2B had first awoken, she had been in too much of a rush to fully take in her surroundings. Now, the quiet morning after, she noticed how truly crowded Toriel's lone guest bedroom had become. Most of 2B and 9's belongings had been piled in this room in towers of cardboard boxes stretching from floor to ceiling, looming like ancient obelisks. 2B wondered who had brought them here. Papyrus and Sans, perhaps. Even the bed from the lakeside cottage had somehow been dragged in here. Standing against the opposite wall of the room, 60 was half buried under its covers, snoozing peacefully with a tiny laptop computer still propped up on her lap. It was a gesture that seemed at once equal parts thoughtful and thoughtless. 2B and 9 sat on the bed at each other's sides as Toriel stood before them, looming over the two androids with a mixture of sternness and concern writ all over her face. She held a paw over 9's cheek, bathing it in the emerald glow of healing magic, and slowly moved up his face, tracing the path of the grievous wounds that ran across his head from chin to forehead. There were no longer canyons carved in 9's fair face. The staunching gel and self-repair nanomachines had done much to heal him already, stopping the bleeding and beginning to knit lacerated skin and muscle back together. Toriel's magic, hopefully, would speed the healing process along. 2B felt a twinge of guilt every time she looked at his face, but she could not look away. Her eyes were drawn almost magnetically to trace the path of those scars marring his cheek, nose, brow, and forehead out of some morbid blend of horror and fascination. 9's favorite blue nightshirt hung on his shoulders, unbuttoned. His exposed torso beneath was riddled with a myriad of pale scars, some short, some long, some straight, some jagged. Beyond the barrier, it would have been a simple matter to create skin grafts even with the Resistance's dwindling resources. In the bunker, 9s could have the damaged flesh easily replaced or simply transfer his consciousness to a fresh body altogether and have the old one recycled for parts. It wasn't so simple down here, even though Alphys had the technology to fabricate new synthetic skin and musculature. Toriel tisk tsked at 9s, her eyes lowered as she did her work. I ought to have tied you to a chair the minute you tried to leave, she scolded him, her voice hoarse and husky and threatening to break with every word. You have been quite a fool, 9s. Don't have to tell me twice, 9s muttered. I should have let you, he added in a voice low enough to be just out of earshot. As he sat and let the old exiled queen administer her treatment, 9's remaining arm snaked around 2B's and tugged her closer to his side. He hadn't left 2B's side since she'd rescued him, taking every chance he was given to hold on to her. When she'd brought him home to a silent house, Toriel, Asriel, and 60 had all fallen asleep waiting for her to return. She'd given him what he'd asked for: a hot bath, fresh pajamas, warm blankets to sleep under, and all the while he'd refused to let go of her, which had made the bath part a little difficult. 2B had lain in bed with 9's arm wrapped tightly around her waist and his head cushioned by her chest, as though he'd needed the sound of the muffled hum of her black box through her skin to lull him into a peaceful sleep. But while he'd dozed away, she hadn't fallen asleep. She'd had enough of that over the past few weeks, and besides, her mind was racing, a single train of thought circling her head like debris caught in a whirlpool. She thought she had known how much 9s had loved her, how important she was to him, but even after all the time the two of them had spent as a family and everything they had gone through together, he was still managing to surprise her with just how much she meant to him. Not too long ago, she hadn't thought it was possible for anybody to care so much about her, even knowing full well who she really was and what she'd done. What 9s had done, his actions in their foolishness and destructiveness were beyond the pale spoke, in their own twisted way, to the frightening strength of his devotion. He really couldn't imagine life without her. 2B understood that. She'd never been able to imagine life without him, no matter how many times she'd had to endure it. 2B rested her head on 9's shoulder and patted him on the chest, feeling the warmth and softness of his bare skin, her fingers brushing against the rough and hard scar tissue running in crisscross patterns across that soft skin. With her ear pressed to his shoulder, she could hear the faint resonance of his black box humming merrily in his chest as the vibrations traveled through his body. Toriel pulled her hand back from 9S's face, sighing deeply as she closed her eyes. Though she did not age, her healing magic was still not what it once had been, or so she claimed, and using it took a lot out of her. "That is all I can do for now," she announced, holding a paw to her forehead as though the strain of her magic had given her a headache. Thanks, Mom," Nines mumbled, sinking deeper against 2B's arm and resting his head against hers. "We're sorry to have troubled you this early in the morning," 2B said. "You knew what you were signing up for when you adopted a pair of soldiers," said Nines. Toriel gave the two of them a sad little smile and wrapped her arms around them. "Oh, I have had much worse troubles, believe me. You two may be holy terrors at times, my children," she told them, engulfing them in a warm, firm embrace, pressing the two of them as close as she could and then just a little more. "But you are still far from a mother's worst nightmare." Pod 042 arose from the floor, hovering beside the bed. Incoming transmission from Dr. Alphys. Proposal: since this transmission is not urgent, if Units 2B and 9s require additional time for convalescence, the call should be ignored. Toriel broke away and yawned. "This appears to be my cue. Take care and rest up, children. I will wake you up for breakfast when it is ready." With that, and after giving 9s one more gentle pat on the cheek, Toriel switched off the bedside lamp and took her leave. 9s curled up closer as Alphys' voice issued from Pod 042's speakers. Hey guys, how are things on your end?" "Nothing major to report, Alphys." 2B yanked on the thick, soft bed sheets and wrapped them around herself and 9s. "What about you?" 2B? "Is that you?" Undyne's voice was the next to emerge from Pod 042. At the sound of her voice, 9s huddled closer to 2B, as if seeking her protection from it. "Hi, Undyne," 9s mumbled. Undyne ignored him. "It's been a while, 2B." The captain sounded different to 2B, more reserved, more subdued. 2B had gotten a short summary of the past month from Alphys and Sixo and was aware of the difficulties Undyne currently faced. She also knew that in Undyne's current position, the trauma of seeing Chara murder Ascari must still be fresh in her mind, among other things troubling her, and yet the altered tone in her voice was still unnerving. Undyne was usually so free with her emotions, but now, it was as if she'd erected a wall around herself. 2B, of course, knew exactly what those kinds of walls looked like. In fact, 2B nearly felt as though Undyne were trying to mimic her. "It's good to hear from you again, Undyne," 2B answered. "Sorry to have kept you waiting." That's okay," Alphys said. I mean, who among us hasn't overslept once or twice?" She punctuated her little joke with a nervous laugh. "Undyne, I need to talk to you about last night," 2B said. "I did my best to keep casualties to a minimum," she went on, recalling Alphys' insistence on Undyne's behalf that she spare the lives of her foes whenever possible, "but there are limits to my abilities." "Huh." Undyne seemed nonplussed. "I noticed you, cut a lot of people's arms off." "If you're upset with me, I understand," 2B said. "I know how important your compatriots' lives are to you, in spite of our current situation." Undyne paused as if struggling to find the right words to say. Pod 042 floated in the air, mute, the way its arms hung somehow managing to reflect Undyne's speechlessness. "Thanks, 2B, she finally said. 2B could hear just a little bit of the old Undyne in her voice. A little bit more of her confidence, her brash, chipper, never-say-die attitude rang in the air. "Well, we've, got a busy day ahead of us, not to blow you guys off. I mean, well, I am sure you guys need a little more tea time to rest up too," Alphys butted in. "So why don't we call back later today? And not that we don't want to talk more. No offense." "None taken," 2B told her. "Thanks for checking up on us." "Wait." Nines spoke up, clearing his throat. Undyne. I don't know if this means as much coming from me, but I understand how important the promise I made to you was, and I'm sorry I broke it. Back then, last night. I wasn't myself, and that was my fault. If there's anything I can do to make it up to you. I mean, I know it'd be a challenge to forgive me after what I've done, but... Yeah, Undyne said. "Whatever. See you later, 9s. Oh, wait, one more thing, Nines said, raising his voice a bit. We know where Chara's hiding the other black boxes. Or, well, we can't get to them yet, but we have a pretty good idea where they are, at least. And how to get to them. There was silence for a few seconds. Neither Alphys nor Undyne knew how to react to that news. Woohoo! That's great! Alphys finally cried out. Dines, did you hear that? Nines came through for us after all. Dines. Nines parroted, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well, wow, look at the time, gotta go. Undyne shouted. Talk to ya later, love ya, bye. Pod 042 spoke up next. Connection terminated. Nines promptly sank into the bed, burrowing deep into the blankets until only his white hair was visible above the covers. She's never going to forgive me, he whined. 2B gently ruffled his hair and tugged at the covers enveloping him. There, she consoled him, curling up around him and holding him to her chest. Give her time. Not everybody trusts as easily as you. You know, now that I think about it, Nines murmured, that's a weird thing to say, there. What's there, and why is whatever there is supposed to make me feel better? I mean, it's what's here, he said, his hand drowsily trailing along the soft fleece collar of 2B's nightshirt, that makes me feel better. 2B couldn't help but smile. You're overthinking it, Nines. Well, you know us scanners, Nines trailed off, his voice growing fainter and fainter until he fell silent, placated by the sound of 2B's black box. Likewise, 2B laid back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to rest for just a little while longer. Chapter 48, E-Charade, Part I. YoRHa units typically didn't have to deal with being out of commission in the long term, but when they did, it was hell. Especially for scanners. Long ago, back on the surface, when he and 2B had still been part of the war effort, it felt like a lifetime ago it practically was. Nines had suffered severe damage to his limbs during a mission into contested territory, one of the many shifting borders on the Earth between the machines and the Resistance, to open up a supply line to an under-siege camp. While normally that would have been as trivial for 9 seconds to deal with as uploading his consciousness back to the bunker, installing himself into a fresh body, and heading back down to reconvene with 2B, the machines had a powerful communications jamming array in place. Practically immobile, Nines had been stuck convalescing in the camp for nearly 3 days while 2B had worked solo to bring down the jamming array. It hadn't taken him more than a few hours to get restless, fidgety, and bored. Inconsolably bored. Those 3 days had been awful. The Resistance camp had no other YoRHa units stationed for support, medical or otherwise. 2B had still been standoffish as could be. He'd only been assigned to her about a week ago, which meant, he'd realized in hindsight, that she'd killed him very recently, and besides, she'd had a mission to complete in his stead, so there was little comfort to be found from her. What little comfort she'd given him, though, even if it had only been so much as her hand on his cheek, had meant the world to him. 70 hours spent lying on a hard cot with a thin blanket, only marginally worse than what he had in his quarters back on the bunker, to be frank, trying desperately to pass the time by retreating into his mind and running through hacking routines. Every scanner had a handful of simulated hostile virtual environments to run through in their downtime to keep their skills sharp. He'd run through all of them. It had felt like he'd spent hours flying around, blasting through firewalls and zipping through data ports until he'd popped out to ask Pod 153 for the time and discovered he'd only been hacking for 20 minutes. When Nines had woken up in the morning after this whole shit show with the Royal Guard and found that his legs weren't working due to widespread, minor damage affecting both legs, failsafes had been engaged while he'd been in rest mode to prevent the damage from worsening and give his body's limited self-repair systems time to get things back into working order, he'd thought back to that time. Of course, things were different now. This time he had a soft bed with fluffy blankets, almost more pillows than he knew what to do with, books galore to read and reread at his leisure, and plenty of company. Nines sat up in bed, the covers drawn up to his chest, as 2B swiped the pillow from the other bed and slipped it behind his back for extra support. Anything else I can do for you before we head out? She asked. Nines shrugged. One more hug would be nice. 2B smiled and leaned in, wrapping her arms around him. Nines returned the hug. Hold on, he added. Remember our deal? Right. My mistake. 2B squeezed tighter, nearly crushing him. Soon after he'd originally lost his right arm in Alfie's lab, he and 2B had agreed that whenever he could only give her half a hug, she would have to hug him twice as hard. After a long, silent moment had passed, she let go and took a step back, but not before she brushed the hair from his forehead, careful to keep her touch light as her fingers passed over his scars, and planted a soft kiss there. Rest up, Nines. She smiled again, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Nines could tell that her heart still ached at the sight and feel of his injuries. She applied her combat visor, drew a colorful scarf up past her nose, and pulled up the hood of her coat, covering every inch of bare skin and leaving nothing visible but a few locks of white hair. It won't take us more than an hour to get back from Snowdin. The ruins, once an ancient city called home, boasted an incredibly small population more or less cut off from the rest of the kingdom. It was largely self-sufficient, in what little of a self it had that needed to be sufficient, but unfortunately, its only grocery store had run dangerously low on food these past few days. Androids didn't need to eat, but Toriel did, and she was loath to dine on her own and spare nothing for the rest of her household. So Toriel was making an extremely rare visit to Snowdin, in disguise, to stock up on food, and 6O and 2B, also in heavy disguise, were joining her. 6O because she was eager to see the town, and 2B because 6O was eager to see the town. You sure this is a good idea? Nines asked. I've got a lot of first-hand experience with bad ideas, you know, and this kinda sounds like one. We'll be fine as long as 6O and I don't pass for androids. Obviously, I won't be able to rely on my NFCS or Pod 042 if things go south, but after last night, I doubt the Royal Guard has the manpower to give us any significant resistance if we're spotted. 2B spoke as though she were preparing for a new assignment from the commander, not escorting an old woman and a fugitive to go grocery shopping. Just be careful, Nines said, settling into his little throne of pillows. I don't want to. He had to whisper his next words, they wouldn't come out any other way. I don't want to lose you again. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting back tears. I'll be back, I promise. 2B wiped his tears on her glove and patted him on the cheek, her other hand taking his and squeezing it. I love you, Nines. I love you too, 2B. His voice was hoarse. By the time he opened his eyes again, 2B was gone. But Nines did not remain alone for long. Within a minute, he had a visitor. Many rumors had sprung up around the new lord of the castle and king of the mountain, only living scion of the Dreamer family, the outsider from the surface who had taken up the banner of monster kind with unmatched zealotry, the foretold angel who would deliver an oppressed people to freedom, Chara Dreamer. One such rumor was that Chara never slept. That one, unlike the one suggesting that they had stolen Ascari's soul and bonded with it to gain the old king's immense power, was true. How long can you go without sleeping? 13B whispered in the back of their mind as Chara struggled to stop their eye from glazing over while going over the casualty reports from last night's debacle. Even a top-model android like me needs to go into rest mode every once in a while. And once you do. Chara's left hand twitched involuntarily, as it had when they had first come to occupy this body. How had 13B grown so strong as to exert such dominance over their mind after so many months of utter silence? Sleep is for the dead, dear, they idly replied, focusing once more on the results of the damage 2B and Nines had wrought. But their mind wandered yet again. They wondered what they could do to exorcise this willful spirit. 13B's memory data was still contained within this body. If they could hack into it somehow, or connect it to a sufficiently advanced computer interface, they could delete everything that belonged to 13B and render themselves once again the sole master of this body. You'll be dead soon enough. You've seen what 2B and Nines are capable of. You'll never win against them, and you'll never be able to hurt my 6O again. 13B cried out. Chara felt the venom behind 13B's words. It stung, but they retained their composure. What's this about 6O? You're 6O, they inquired. You barely knew the girl before I came into your life. You lied to her, manipulated her, seduced her, but the feelings you faked, I felt for real. When she came to us after you murdered 7B and 5E and you pretended to be consoled by her, I felt her kindness. When we hugged, I felt it, when she laughed, I heard it, and when you kissed her, I did, too, and it was real to me. Oh, brother. Chara kept reading the report, leaning back in their throne. The joys of being commander-in-chief. It was almost enough to make them feel the slightest bit of grudging respect for Commander White. I won't let you hurt Sixo. If you even get close, I'll take over again. And I'll do something horrible. You don't have what it takes, Chara told her. I remember you, 13B, bawling, mewling, begging me to spare your wretched friends' lives. You're nothing compared to me. And I know who you are now, number 13, said 13B, spitting out the name. I heard you talk to the commander. We're cut from the same cloth. Everything you can be, I can be. And is that what revitalized you? I hate you as much as you hated us. I'm going to do to your precious monsters what you did to 5E. 7B, the commander. Yoarha. I'll. Oh? Is your memory faulty? It wasn't me who destroyed Yoarha. I merely took advantage of the chaos. Your own fellow androids threw you to the wolves the second your inconvenience outweighed your usefulness. Shut up. All you ever were the standard bearers for a cosmic lie. Designated martyrs for a fabricated god from the day your sorry lot stepped off the assembly line. Shut up. Chara pressed on. Your precious humanity has been extinct for 9,000 years. They chuckled. Glory to mankind, indeed. Shut up. Shut up. Chara's hand curled into a fist against their wishes. I hate you. Humanity is long dead and gone. Move past it. I'll kill you. I'll. Chara felt something slip from their eye. They reached up and brushed it off their cheek, their fingertip came away glossy and wet. What's this? A tear? Tears for humanity. They're not gone, it's a lie, it's just a damned dirty lie. The machines are playing tricks on us. Humanity, they're up there. On the moon. Waiting and hoping that one day they can return to the Earth. And when they come back. 13B's angry words dissolved into a rabid, hateful shriek. You see, this is why you androids are so unworthy of life. So many millennia and still tied to the memory of mankind. Never learning to live for yourself, never growing, never evolving as a species, repeating the same tired mistakes again and again. This is why the surface will be purged. Androids are an evolutionary dead end. You're an android too. You're one of us. My dear, I am not one of you. Mark my words, I'm not going to let you finish what the machines started. I'm going to make you pay. I'll make you beg the same way you made me beg. It's only a shame I can't make you kill your father a second time. Chara shot to their feet, the throne room with its gilded walls and ceiling spinning around them, clutching at their head, their fingers curling into their hair, the cold rim of their silver, their tiara biting into their fingers, their fingernails digging into their scalp. They gritted their teeth and hissed in agony as their head throbbed. Their report from the royal guard, now forgotten, slipped off their lap and flopped to the floor in front of them. It still felt like only yesterday. The sword running through Ascari's chest. The dust. The dust. Every part of Chara ached, and their heart most of all, their black boxes whirring pitched up to an audible whine. They'd killed their father. They'd begged him to surrender, but no, they had to. And as they'd stood there, dumbfounded at their own behavior, surprised they had made good on their threat, there had been laughter. The laughter they had heard as they'd stood over Ascari's remains. It had been hers. Shut up, they cried out. You killed him, didn't you? It was you. 13B's mocking laughter filled Chara's mind. I wish I could take credit for that. No, you loved him and yet you murdered him of your own free will. No. Chara doubled over as if they'd been socked in the gut, stumbling over the stairs before the throne and falling ungracefully to the floor. The golden tiles beneath their cheek were cold. It was you. You. I'll get rid of you. You're lying. You made me murder my father. 13B kept laughing. Stop it. Chara drew back their fist and plunged it into the floor with all their might, shattering the tiles, lacerating their hand. As the searing pain traveled up their arm and blood ran from their knuckles, 13B's laughter faded away. Relieved to be free of their tormentor, Chara rose to their feet, their legs shaky, their knees knocking, panting, their breathing still rapid and shallow. They stood, hunched over, blood dripping from their clenched fist onto the floor. The door to the throne room swung open and Captain Undine strode through. "Your Highness," she spat through gritted teeth in the most diplomatic tone she could muster, "I'm here to report on the—" Her single yellow eye widened with shock as she caught sight of her king, her words catching in her throat, her mouth agape. Chara was a wreck, and they knew it. And within an instant, they knew how to turn this to their advantage. Their eye widened, and they faked a shuddering, half-choked sob as they stared down at their hands in fascination. "I'm free," they gasped, drawing on 13B's voice as they looked up, their eye meeting Undine's. It's me, I did it. Chara, they're gone." Undine's cold, harsh body language, her ramrod straight posture, the coldness in her face, it all melted away like an ice cube over an open flame, and without hesitation, she rushed to Chara's side. Chara wasn't the least bit surprised. She was truly the type to take action first and think later, and her tendency toward heroics made her a sucker for vulnerability. But Chara could tell that Undine was surprised by her own readiness to grab hold of them. Safely ensconced in Undine's grip, Chara put on the waterworks. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. They've been controlling me for so long, and I had to watch as they did all those horrible things." Hey, it's gonna be alright," Undine patted them on the back, still a little unnerved. So you're 13BER, lucky, huh?" "Oh," Chara mewled, sniffling. I really am. I fought Chara for so long, and now, it's over." There was an ever so suspicious twinge at the corner of Undine's mouth. She wasn't fully buying it. I know," Chara said, "you don't have any reason to believe me, you never knew me, but I've fought so long and hard, I've struggled so much. I watched as they forced me to murder my friends, all I could do was watch and scream out in my head, and it hurt so much. Listen, Lucky. It's gonna be okay," Undine stammered, her gaze darting across the throne room. Chara could sense the conflict in her heart. She wanted to believe that it was Lucky she was comforting, wanted it badly, but wasn't quite ready to take the leap of faith. Chara laid a hand on Undine's cheek, caressing her smooth, scaly skin. I want to talk to Sixo. Is she safe?" Undine took Chara's hand and pulled it away, unsure of what to do with it. I want her to know that." Chara squeezed their eyes shut and buried their face in Undine's shoulder. "Chara lied to her, manipulated her, seduced her, but the feelings they faked, I felt for real. When she came to me after they murdered 7B and 5E and they pretended to be consoled by her, I felt her kindness. When we hugged, I felt it, when she laughed, I heard it, and when they kissed her, I did, too, and it was real to me. I want to see her again," Chara whimpered. "I want to show her that what we had, it was real. Please, you have to let me see her. I want her to know. I don't want her to look back on what we had together and think it was all a lie." Undine gave Chara another comforting pat on the back. I'm sorry. I can't do that." She shrugged. "To know where she is." "But you helped her escape." Undine sighed and shook her head. "I don't know where the others took her. She could be anywhere in the kingdom." "Sorry." She knew, and she still only half trusted Chara. What more could Chara say to draw the information out of her? "You're afraid, aren't you?" they asked. I understand, you think Chara might be listening in on whatever you tell me." "Huh?" Undine gave Chara an incredulous look. I can't tell you what I don't know," she said, letting out a little nervous laugh. "Sorry." "They're gone," Chara insisted. I fought them and I won." They took Undine's hands and grasped them tightly. They can't hear a word I say, and even if they could, they're not coming back. Ever. You can tell me." "No good." Chara had to offer something to prove their Lucky's trustworthiness. "I can tell you," they said, where Chara hid the other black boxes. Undine's earfins perked up. "Really?" Chara closed their eyes and bit their lip, making a big show out of pretending to concentrate. "Tunnels. Dark tunnels, somewhere under. Damp place. Dark and wet. Waterfall. Undyne offered. Yes, yes. Waterfall. That's it. Chara nodded. I live there. Undyne grinned, her eye brightening. There's a room with a piano, Chara went on, and... At just the right time, the door to the throne room swung open yet again. The royal attendant standing at the door saluted. Your Highness. Captain Undyne. Your presence is requested at Central Hospital. It's urgent. This had better be important, Alphys groused on her way to Central Hospital, to drag me away from the mobile armor project. Those grumbling thoughts running through her sleep-deprived head vanished when she stepped into the lobby and saw at least a dozen monsters of all shapes and sizes, all of them members of the Royal Guard, all of them sorry sights, many still wearing their armor, all of them nursing broken bones as well as severed stumps that had once been arms and legs. Alphys was not a medical doctor, she was an engineer first and foremost, even if her position as royal scientist did require her to have at least a basic understanding in many fields, yet trudging through the mass of the wounded and rubbing elbows filled her with a sense of personal responsibility so overwhelming it bordered on nausea, like she had a duty to help all these people and there were just too many of them and the pressure was crushing her. She pushed her way through the crowd as gently as she could, mumbling and stammering apologies constantly until she reached the receptionist. Dr. Gabrietta S sent for me, she squeaked out, so, if you'll just, I don't wanna hold anyone up, so. The receptionist lazily pointed one of his 7 tentacles down the hallway leading to the east wing of the hospital. First right, third door on the left. With a hurried thank you, Alphys rushed into the comparatively empty hallway, taking solace in the emptiness of its pristine, white walls. Until 2 medics carrying a gurney between them barreled down the hall at full tilt and nearly bowled her over. Alphys barely managed to pin herself to the wall in time. Her heart leaped into her throat, pounding like a bass drum. Alphys found a strange sense of foreboding growing within her as she followed the directions to Gabrietta's office. Gabrietta was the chief surgeon of the hospital and renowned as a prodigy in the field of medical magic, but her main claim to fame, just as Alphys' experiments with the amalgamates overshadowed so much of her engineering work, was that she was the daughter of the previous royal scientist, Gaster. Gabrietta was tall, lanky, and permanently hunched over, with an angular and skeletal head like a cow's skull engraved with a permanent grin, foggy emerald eyes shining like candlelight through smoke in her deep, hollow eye sockets. She wasted no time as she beckoned Alphys into her office with long, spindly fingers. Ah, Dr. Alphys. How kind of you to come here with such haste, she signed. I have need of you. Did you, are you having trouble getting into your email? Alphys asked, taking her tail in her hands and nervously running her thumbs over the tip. Gabrietta's eye sockets brightened. Oh, Dr. Alphys, how droll. No, the IT department helped me with that already. I am overseeing a very unique patient and am in need of your guidance. With that, Gabrietta took Alphys by the arm and left the office, gliding down the hall to one of the operating rooms. A unique patient? My guidance? Alphys felt the pit in her stomach grow larger. What could I know about biology and medical care that Dr. Gabrietta doesn't? No, it can't be that, Alphys insisted to herself, putting the thought out of her mind. Maybe the patient was a machine life form, or maybe somebody needed to be fitted with a prosthetic. But what if? Gabrietta guided her to her patient and Alphys couldn't help but gasp. It was the left arm, bisected torso cut diagonally from hip to shoulder and head of a scaly, snake-like, dragonish woman. The only clue she still lived was in the steady rise and fall of her chest and the occasional flicking of her thin, forked tongue in and out of her mouth. Alphys noticed a sickeningly familiar wet, glossy, translucent white sheen on the monster's scaly hide. At the foot of the surgical bed was a large glass flask filled halfway with thin white goop. On the tray next to the bed, sitting alongside sharp and shining surgical implements, was a copper orb. At first, I could not believe it, Gabrietta signed. Despite suffering such a mortal wound in her battle with the androids, we found Lieutenant Snacka still clinging to life, but only just. She glided over to the table, cradling the copper orb in her long, thin, bony talons before setting it aside. Her symptoms were strange. She was not turning into dust as a monster in her condition would, and she seemed to be emitting low levels of an obscure form of radiation. I knew I'd read about these symptoms before. Alphys found her breath frozen in her lungs. Her heart skipped a beat. In your declassified reports on the experiments you performed with DT energy. Gabrietta ran her finger along the orb yet again, the orb Alphys now recognized as the core of a machine life form. One of the other fatalities of last night was a severely injured member of the mechanized regiment of the Guard. Its body was damaged beyond repair, but its core was intact. No, Alphys thought. No, not this. Not again. I put this all behind me. The lieutenant is near death. She will not last more than an hour in this state. Frankly, it is a miracle she has remained intact this long without turning to dust. But if we give her this, she may last long enough for us to find a more permanent solution. Gabrietta's eyes bored into Alphys as she loomed over the diminutive royal scientist. Doctor, I need your expertise. Will you oversee the implantation of the machine core? After an interminable pause, an eternity gazing into those foggy green eyes, Alphys said something. Can I, go to the bathroom, she asked. A wide grin running from ear to ear, Asriel pulled up a stool and sat at 9's bedside. Good morning, Nines. Mom wants me to look after you while everyone else is gone. Can I get you anything? Some water. Nines looked over at pod 153, which had just placed a tall glass of water on the nightstand. Nah, I'm good. Or, Mom has some books you might like. Or maybe, the kid continued, an enthusiastic gleam in his eyes, we could play some hacking games. Whoa, there, kiddo. I'm still pretty tired from last night, Nines said, sighing. Oh, yeah, sorry I didn't bring Alphys back with me like I promised. Oh, that's okay, Asriel stammered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He faked a cough. We'll just get this looked at some other. I know you're faking it. Asriel became very interested in the hem of his striped shirt and began kneading it with his paws. So, what's really going on? Why do you want to see her so badly? I want to tell her, Asriel paused, then sighed. I want her to know that, it's okay. I never got to see Dad again because she didn't tell him about me, and I wish I'd had that chance, but. Before the kid's sniffles could turn into full-blown weeping, Nines grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him onto the bed, hugging him as best he could. Sorry I asked. Asriel buried his face in 9's chest. Nines winced as the kid's fuzzy snout brushed against some of his fresher injuries. I just wanted to tell her that, she did what she thought was right, and I don't blame her, he sobbed. I want my dad back, and she knows that, but, if she feels bad because of that, I wanna say I'm sorry. Hey, it's okay, Nines said, patting him on the back. Asriel burrowed deeper into his embrace. It's okay. Asriel curled up on his lap. I don't want her to feel guilty, or blame herself, or do anything stupid, he said, because she thinks she has to make up for it. You mean like I did? Nines wondered. That's, surprisingly mature. What do you mean, surprisingly? Asriel asked. I'm your older brother. Nines rolled his eyes. Oh, not this again, he muttered, suppressing an ugly snort of laughter. Hey, why don't we send Alphys a message? You can tell her all about how you feel and, take care of that. It's not the same, Asriel murmured, his voice muffled by 9's chest. Mom always said if you're gonna apologize to someone, why you should do it in person. Better than nothing, though, isn't it? Nines cleared his throat. Pod, send a transmission to Dr. Alphys' personal cell phone. What little remained of Alphys' already pitiful breakfast stared up at her as she hunched over the bathroom sink, clutching its porcelain edges, her shoulders shaking as she struggled to fill her lungs. Her stomach felt like someone had tied it into knots and wrapped it around her spine, her throat and mouth burned as sour, acerbic bile dripped from her lips into the sink. She gasped for air, shuddering, aware in the back of her mind that deep within her purse, her phone was ringing, but unable to work up the willpower to answer it, unable to do much at all but wipe her lips on a paper towel, turn on the faucet and wash as much of her vomit down the drain as she could, and shuffle back into the hall. Why did her research have to come back to haunt her? Were the people whose bodies she'd desecrated not enough? Was it not enough that it had already nearly ruined her career once before? There was no way she could do what Dr. Gabrietta was asking for. It wouldn't even be preserving Snaka's life, really it would let her exist in that hideous half-melted state, constantly emitting the DT radiation monster's souls released in a quick burst before death, until she became one of those shambling amalgamates, neither monster nor machine, never again able to enjoy a normal life. It wasn't an existence she could bear to inflict on that woman. Alphys made her way back to the operating room shaking with anxiety but knowing exactly what she was going to say. She was going to tell Gabrietta no. She wasn't going to do anything that involved cheating death or messing with souls. When Alphys arrived, she quickly found something more to be anxious about, because standing before the operating table, across from Gabrietta, were Captain Undyne and King Chara Dreamer, their attentions torn between the ghastly sight on the table and the chief surgeon's fluttering hands. The lieutenant was conscious for only a few minutes when we brought her here, Gabrietta signed, but she requested to see the two of you as soon as possible. The head surgeon glanced away and noticed Alphys, her emerald eyes lighting up. Ah. Dr. Alphys. I do hope it is okay to have guests. One does not say no, after all, to our sovereign king. Undyne and Chara both looked at Alphys in turn, and what struck Alphys first was the different look in Chara's eye, somehow softer, weaker, fragile. Alfie. Undyne's eye lit up. Hey. What are you doing here? Dynes. Alphys' voice caught in her throat. Your Highness. Dr. Alphys is here. Gabrietta signed to Undyne and Chara, to share with me her expertise. We hope that together we may spare the lieutenant's life. A flash of worry streaked across Undyne's face as her eye darted from Alphys to the body of her comrade. Snaka. Is that you? Undyne. The voice, raspy and tortured, nearly indistinguishable from a death rattle, came from what little remained of Lieutenant Snaka's body. Her eyes cracked open, the sclerae were jet black. She raised her single remaining arm, the forearm split down the middle and fanged like a grotesque dragon's head, pitifully trembling. Gabrietta reached out to lower Snaka's arm, but Undyne's hand shot out and grabbed hers by the wrist. With her other hand, Undyne patted her comrade's arm. That's right, she said. I'm here. Snaka laughed. Always, ran, behind you. Jealous, much. I get to do something, first, this time. Alphys wasn't sure how well Undyne knew her subordinate, but Snaka's words seemed to have a profound effect on her. Listen, you asshole, she stammered, letting out a nervous, mirthless laugh, you're not gonna. King. Sovereign. Chara. Chara seemed uncharacteristically unable to think of a response when Snaka addressed them. I tried, damn androids. Did my best to carry out your will. Be proud. Please, Gabrietta signed, we should not permit the lieutenant to waste her energy speaking. Alphys, we must begin. Wait. Undyne took a deep breath. I need to speak with Alphys in private first. If you would grant us a minute, King Chara, she asked, bowing politely. That may be all we have, Gabrietta signed. Chara sighed, their eyes downcast. I'll allow it, Captain. As soon as the king gave their okay, Undyne rushed to Alphys' side and dragged her far down the hall. All right, she whispered, glancing up and down to make sure the coast was clear. I've got a lot to tell you. First off, that person in there is not Chara Dreamer. What? Alphys exclaimed. SHH. Undyne held a finger to Alphys' snout. At least, they say they aren't Chara. It's their host body 13B. That's happened before, said Alphys. Back when? Yes, I know. She says she's back in control now permanently. Thing is, I don't believe them, Undyne said. I want to, but it's a pretty hard thing to believe, yeah, Alphys admitted. If there was some way for her to prove, beyond a doubt, that she's the one in control. I got it. We could, Alphys offered, have her do something the real Chara would never do. Like, tell us where the other black boxes are, or repeal the law making the androids F-fugitives, demilitarize the guard. Brilliant. Undyne's eye sparkled. Yeah. They'd never disadvantage themselves like that. If 13B agrees to do any of that, we know she's the one in control. She grabbed Alphys by the waist and lifted her off her feet. I love you, Alfie. Down the hall, a very stern, very irritated physician poked their head out of one of the doorways and loudly shushed the two of them. With a sheepish grin, Undyne set Alphys back down. Sorry. Now, Alphys went on, swallowing the lump in her throat. I gotta talk to you. Dynes, Dr. Gabrietta wants me to turn Snaka into an amalgamate to spare her life. I see can't do that, but I just feel so helpless. Undyne cringed. I am with you, Alfie. But, it's hard to see her like this, and if we could give her just a few more days. What? But you hate Snaka. Hate's a strong word. She's Undyne sighed. I've known her since I was little. She was always trying to copy me. I started training with Jerson, she found another retired old former guard to train with. I accidentally beat up the mailman, she on purpose beat up the river person. I met Ascari, she started chasing around the royal guard and trying to get to crime scenes ahead of them to beat up the bad guys first. You get the idea. Oh. Yeah, she's a sadistic asshole, and gods forbid she's ever in a position with any real power whatsoever, but she always had this hero worship thing going on, and Undyne hung her head. I feel responsible. For where she is now, for what she is now. I don't want her to die. Especially, not after last night. Dynes, I didn't know. I'm sorry. But, Alphys insisted. I can't relieve those experiments. I know. Undyne shook her head. I know, and I'm sorry for asking that of you. If you can't do it, then you can't do it. You're right. Her voice cracked. A few days before she relapses, that's no life at all. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around Alphys. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to put that kind of pressure on you. Alphys patted Undyne on the back. I forgive you. It's okay. I just didn't know what she meant to you. Excuse me, Captain? Doctor. Chara called out, striding over to the two of them. Gabrietta hung back behind them like a living shadow. Alphys had to admit, there was something in Chara's face that signaled a different, kinder personality in control now, but she also had to admit, a facial expression alone wasn't very conclusive evidence that 13B was the one speaking. I do hate to interrupt, but we're running out of time. Dr. Gabrietta has briefed me on the operation discussed and what it entails. Yeah, about that, Alphys wrung her hands. Snaka is a brave, valiant warrior. We can't just let her die without exhausting every possibility to spare her. Chara 13B, maybe, clasped their hands together. Doctor, please, I've seen so many brave soldiers die like this before, back in Ya. They glanced up at the chief surgeon looming over them. With an audience, if they really were 13B and not Chara, they still had to pretend that they were Chara. I mean, they said, clearing their throat, Dr. Alphys, as Sovereign King, I command you to oversee this operation. The lives of our bravest soldiers must be preserved. Alphys bit her lip, feeling once again sick to her stomach. She looked up at Undyne, who simply shrugged sadly. I'll do it, she said, the words instantly turning to ash in her mouth. As Alphys' pre-recorded voicemail message played out through Pod 153's speakers, Nines shrugged. Sorry, Azzy, he told Asriel, comfortingly stroking the boy's floppy ears. We can leave a message for her, though. And no, that's okay. Asriel rested his head on 9S's shoulder. Bad enough not to talk to her face to face. I get it, said Nines, not getting it. I'm sure she's busy making something really awesome in her lab right now. Let's call back later today. Chapter 49, E-Charade, Part 2. Alphys never expected the skills she hadn't used in years for good reason to return to her so readily, for everything she did on the operating table to feel so natural, but as she guided Dr. Gabrieta's skillful hands and directed the installation of the machine core into Lieutenant Snaka's chest cavity, what was left of it, her hands weren't even shaking. In fact, she felt as though she were watching herself through a camera, as if her hands weren't moving of her own volition, as if the words pouring from her mouth directing Gabrieta on what to do weren't being spoken by her, but by something living within her that acted on its own. With a deft application of healing magic, Gabrieta sealed the incision, her bony hands alight with a pale yellow-green glow. The monitors displaying Snaka's vital signs began to report much happier numbers as her condition began to stabilize. Saved from the brink of death, but only for a scant few days until the lieutenant still lived, but not life as she'd known it. For all intents and purposes, dead, but undying, deceased, yet immortal, alive, but not as she'd known it, a living ghost, a shambling mass of fragmentary memories given presence. Snaka's jet-black eyes cracked open. "Captain." "Your Highness." "Doctor," she whispered, "I can't feel my legs." In that instant, Alphys couldn't feel her legs either, and the sterile white walls of the operating room, pulsing and throbbing from the searing glare of the overhead lights, spun around her. This was still, she mused to herself before she passed out and collapsed to the floor, a bad idea, but the time when such thoughts would have done her good had long since passed. Alphys came to on the tiny futon Dr. Gabrieta kept tucked away in her office. The lights were dim, the door was closed, sealing away the hustle and bustle filling the rest of the hospital. Gabrieta wasn't at her desk, though. Instead, Undine was lounging in her swivel chair, her boots casually propped up on the desk. Despite her relaxed posture, she was watching Alphys like a hawk, and shot to her feet as soon as Alphys lifted her head. "Alphys!" She rushed to Alphys' side and helped her sit up. "Hey there, you all right?" Alphys nodded, still feeling a little lightheaded and just a little nauseous. "How long was I out?" she asked Undine. "Just a few minutes. The doctor let me bring you over here to lie down. She's supervising the lieutenant right now." Undine ran her fingers over the small of Alphys' back in tight circles, massaging away the stress and fatigue tensing up her muscles. "How are you feeling?" Alphys took a deep breath, trying to quell the violent upheavals in her stomach. I'm fine." "Really? Good. Fine. Hunkadory." She took another deep breath and felt something wet and acidic rise in the back of her throat. "Waste basket, please," she blurted out, clasping a hand over her mouth. Undine understood right away and fetched the little basket littered with crumpled-up prescription pads, bringing it right up under Alphys' chin, and right on cue, Alphys coughed up a thin, hatefully acerbic wad of bile, burning her throat, tongue, and nostrils, her stomach twisting itself into anxious knots as it upended itself. She coughed and hacked violently, hot tears burning her eyes as all of the repressed horror and self-loathing that had been building up throughout the operation forced its way out of her by any means necessary. There. Undine ran her fingers up and down the back of Alphys' neck, the light touch of her gliding fingertips and sharp nails tingling her scales in an almost ticklish way. "It's all right. Get it all out." Alphys heaved again and again, with each cough feeling her stomach fold in on itself and wrap itself around her spine, each time wondering how she was even finding the tiniest dregs of stomach acid to expel until it was finally over. Once her stomach had calmed itself and the waste basket had been placed back on the floor, within arm's reach, just in case, and Alphys had wiped away the bile from her lips with a tissue, she curled up at Undine's side, tucking her knees into her chest. Undine pulled her onto her lap, gripping her in a warm, tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, Alphys," she murmured. I am okay," Alphys insisted. I'm proud of you." "I'm so proud of you, Alphys," Undine told her. I know how much it hurts to relieve what you did back then, but today, you used what you'd learned to save someone. Snaka, she was going to die in a few hours, but you gave her a few more days. Days she can use to say goodbye to her family, her friends." Alphys threw her arms around Undine's neck and buried her fingers in her long, thick red tresses, the silky feeling of her hair steadying her. "I guess, sometimes," Undine said, "even the most terrible things we can do can help us do something great later on. I love you, Alphys." She gave Alphys another comforting squeeze. "I'll love you too, Dines," Alphys answered, returning the Undine's hug with a hearty squeeze of her own. So where's Chara, or 13B, or W, whoever's in control now, she asked. Hung back with Dr. Gabrieta and Snaka. Undine shrugged. So, what do you think? Who's in the driver's seat? Well, Alphys scratched her chin, her tail twitching behind her as she thought. I can't really say. None of us knew 13B at all, even 60 didn't meet her until after Chara H had already taken control, so if Chara's pretending to be 13B, then even if they did a really bad job, how would we know? Undine nodded, crossing her arms. Yeah. Gotta feel sorry for 13B if she's really in there. Everyone who really knew her is gone. There's only one way to tell if it really is 13B. As you said, we'll have to get her to do something Chara would never do. End the war. Demilitarize the Guard. Repeal the anti-android laws. Anything that helps us and hurts Chara. If I were 13B, well, I'd take any chance I could get to fuck Chara over. She clenched her fist. Kman, it's time the two of us had a talk with our boss. Alphys slid off the futon, her head still spinning a bit. She wondered why Gabrieta had one of these in her office. Did she often stay here overnight? The thought of that tall, bony, skeletal woman curled up on a tiny little cot like this brought a hint of a smile to her face. Maybe the two of them had more in common than Alphys had thought. Undine led Alphys out of the office and toward the operating room, only to encounter Gabrieta and Chara on the way. The four of them stood in the corridor, Gabrieta towering over the rest even when hunched over. Alphys couldn't quite parse the look on Chara's face, but they seemed mildly confused. In their eyes, normally fierce and focused, there was a lost look, like a child who'd gotten separated from their parents in the middle of a busy mall. Was it an act? Or was that how 13B felt? Dr. Alphys, Gabrieta signed, her words harder to discern due to the trembling in her spindly fingers as she spun her words like a spider spinning its web. King Chara has been informing me of your mobile armor project. Perhaps later this afternoon, when Lieutenant Snaka has stabilized, we could retrofit whatever you have into prostheses for her. I would love to see your workshop. Oh, and by the way, Gabrieta went on, you used to perform maintenance on the androids, didn't you? It wasn't a crime when I did it, Alphys stammered. Gabrieta shook her shoulders as if she were laughing, the emerald lights in her hollow eye sockets twinkling. That is not what I meant. I've just heard that those androids' systems are as complex as any biological organism. It's interesting to think about the similarities between our work. Why yeah, it's, pretty interesting stuff. Alphys felt heat rising up to flush her cheeks. Why was Dr. Gabrieta being so friendly? I mean, when you think about it, biological organisms are the most complicated and efficient machines in the universe. What an elegant way of putting it, said Gabrieta, flattered. Even though androids are our enemies, there is so much we can learn from our synthetic cousins. Please give me your personal phone number. And perhaps your undernet handle as well. Gabrieta fished through the pockets of her black robes and pulled out a cell phone, then handed it to Alphys. Alphys accepted it with trembling fingers and punched in her phone number. This was surreal. How could Gabrieta be fawning over her like this? And what would she think if she and Alphys exchanged undernet handles? All Gabrieta would see would be Alphys' endless posts about anime and plausibly deniable vague posts about her boss, hardly anything that would make her seem like an intelligent, professional individual. Don't have a handle, Alphys lied. Really? Gabrieta replied. But all you young people are on social media nowadays. Not me. Too busy. Alphys handed Gabrieta back her phone. I am sorry, Dr. Gabrieta, but Undine, King Chara, and I need to have a meeting, right away. So, see ya later. Oh, yes, pardon me. I won't keep you. Gabrieta reached out and patted Alphys on both shoulders. By the way, my friends call me Gabby. You have friends? Alphys blurted out, instantly mortified at what she'd let slip out. I am not as much of a workaholic as my reputation would have you believe. Take care, Alphys. With that, Gabrieta turned around and made her way back to her work. Undine let out a low whistle as Dr. Gabrieta left, then patted Alphys on the head. Look at you, Alphys. I'll have to be twice as good to you if I wanna keep you all to myself. Alphys felt her entire face and probably her entire head redden. She wasn't flirting with me, she insisted. Yes, she was, Chara spoke up, crossing their arms and smiling. Trust me. I've seen this a dozen times before. Your Ha's population is 90% women and all of them flirt with each other all the time. They sighed, the smile vanishing from their face. Well, they did. Sounds like it would have been my kind of place, Undine said. You two would have loved it, Chara said wistfully. I miss them. I miss them so much. As their voice cracked, Chara all but fell into Alphys' arms and held her tight, all but weeping into her shoulder. As Alphys felt the frailty of their body, she was convinced. The person crying in her arms over the deaths of her friends, was, beyond the shadow of a doubt, 13B. I still think this is a bad idea, Asriel said, nervously clutching a tub of chocolate ice cream in his paws as he sat at 9's side. Are you sure Mom won't? Nah, it's fine, said Nines, slipping a spoonful of ice cream into his mouth, letting the delicious treat melt over his tongue, filling his mouth with its overwhelmingly rich and decadent taste before he swallowed it. When you're sick or injured and you go to a hospital, you get to eat all the ice cream you want. I saw it in one of Alphys' historical documents. It helps you recover. I dunno, said Asriel. If that were true. Trust me, Nines replied, reaching out to scoop up another spoonful. Mom's gonna be okay with it. Besides, I'm only taking a few bites. Asriel stared into the tub. You've, had like, half of this already. Well, cut me some slack. We don't have chocolate on the surface. Really? Really? Nines finished his next spoonful. He already felt better. There's so much we don't have on the surface. Chocolate, pizza, hot dogs, buffalo wings. On the surface, buffalo don't even have wings. Also, they've been extinct for over 10,000 years. Crazy, huh? Asriel slipped the lid back onto the tub. I still think this is a bad idea, Nines. No, it's fine. Nines wiggled his spoon in the air. Pod, back me up here. Instead of offering Nines its support, Pod 153 began to ring loudly before interrupting itself. Incoming transmission. Statement, this support unit is being hailed by Queen Toriel's cellular telephone. Proposal, accept call immediately. Oh, Asriel whispered, clutching the tub of ice cream closer to his chest. All right, pick up. Nines sighed. Don't worry, Azzy, Mom doesn't have to know about. Know about what? Toriel asked as Pod 153 emitted her voice. About what a great time the two of us are having together. Nines answered. Asriel is reading his favorite book to me. Oh, how sweet. And you are feeling better. Nines bent his knee barely. The failsafes preventing his motor systems from functioning were loosening up as his body's limited self-repair functions did their work. Why yeah. I think I'll be able to walk again in 6 to 9 hours, maybe. Wonderful. Now, you two, I just called to let you know that 2B60, and I will be returning a little later than we expected. I am making sure Papyrus' latest culinary exploration does not burn his house down. Take care, you two, and behave. Yes, Mom. Asriel answered, guiltily stowing away the ice cream. Yeah. Nines sank back and leaned into his pillows. A single affirmation will suffice, 9S, Toriel replied, giggling girlishly. Nines rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, Mom, not you, too. 2B had taken her old admonishment and turned it into a running joke, much to his dismay. Tell 2B I'll never forgive her for this, okay? We will call you again if anything else comes up, Toriel said. Do take care, my children. I love you. Love you too, Mom, Asriel and Nines answered in unison. Pod 153 went silent. Connection terminated, it said in its own voice. Asriel slid off the stool and made his way to the door. Hey. Nines called out. Where do you think you're going? I'm not gonna let you make a liar out of yourself. Asriel called back as he slipped out of the bedroom. I'm gonna go get my favorite book. Wait, no, Asriel was already gone. Nines sighed. Pod, he asked, do you have, Undyne's phone number? Affirmative. However, this support unit would advise against calling Captain Undyne, as audio communications can easily be intercepted in her current position. I just want to send a text message, he clarified. Acknowledged. Text-based communication carries a lower risk of accidental interception. Proposal: Unit 9s will speak his message aloud, and this support unit will transcribe and transmit the text to its intended recipient. Okay. Nines took a deep breath, patting his pod on the arm. Here goes. He cleared his throat. Undyne, this is your friend, and I. He shook his head. Start over. Undyne, this is your friend. You know who. I want to apologize. I didn't mean to offend you. Send text, pod. Message sent. As pod 153 made that announcement, Nines felt his blood freeze. See, can you take it back? Negative. Data, once transmitted, cannot be recalled. It was an obvious fact and one Nines definitely knew, but pod 153 was not the least bit condescending in reminding him. Proposal: if Unit 9's wishes to correct an error in the previous text, he should send another text rectifying the error. Right. Nines cleared his head. Okay. Let's send this. Undyne, sorry about my last text. What I did wasn't wrong because it offended you. What I did was wrong because it broke a promise I made with you. That's what's important. Please forgive me. Send text. Message sent. Nines took the time to reflect over his words again, wondering that perhaps next time he should take that step before saying send text. Oh, shit. Pod, we've got to send another text. Ready to receive message. Okay. Here goes. Undyne, I really do need to apologize to you. Not for offending you. Not for breaking our promise. But for betraying your ideals. I made a mockery of everything you value last night. I'm sorry. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. Nines thought very hard about his choice of words. Pod, send text. Message. Oh, shit. Nines exclaimed. We gotta send another one. I got that wrong, he told pod 153. Acknowledged. Standing by to receive next message. Asriel rushed back into the bedroom, book in hand, and all but leaped onto the bed at 9's side, his long ears flopping as he excitedly flipped through it. Okay, Nines. I found it. Oh, boy, Nines said, not entirely interested in being read to. Who were you talking to? Asriel asked. Oh, Nines couldn't help but feel a little hot under the collar. I kind of messed things up for a friend of mine, and I was just trying to get in touch with her so we could patch things over. Okay. Asriel set the book down on his lap. But it's better to. Yeah, I should apologize in person. But Undyne isn't gonna talk to me unless I really prove to her that I'm ready to do that. Asriel nodded. I guess that makes sense. Want some help? In all of New Home, there was no place more private than the Dreamer family's estate, appropriately named the Royal Castle, and within the home of the Dreamer family there was no more private place than Chara Dreamer's bedroom, and that was where Alphys and Undyne spoke with what seemed more and more likely to be the original owner of Chara Dreamer's stolen body. 13B sat on the side of the bed, flanked by Undyne and Alphys, fretfully twiddling her thumbs as she detailed everything Chara had done to her. Alphys felt her stomach churn as 13B recounted the things Chara had put her through, the torment, the torture, forcing her to watch helplessly as her closest friends died by her own hand, and she realized just what kinds of heinous things Chara was capable of doing to those who got in their way, and compared to what had happened to 5E and 7B, the way they'd been treating her and Undyne was practically merciful. They cut my hair, 13B said, and even changed the color of my eyes. I don't even look like me anymore. With a trembling hand, she reached up and felt the flower covering her right eye. They took everything away from me. Alphys patted her on the knee. Don't worry, 13B. It's all over now. Yeah. You're back in the driver's seat for good now, right? Undyne asked. Alphys could still hear a twinge of suspicion in her voice. 13B nodded. Well, Undyne said, a hard gleam in her eye, let's take everything away from Chara, too. It'll be, Carth Alphys, what's that one word again? See cathartic. Alphys offered. Yeah. Undyne pumped her fist. Kmin, 13B. Let's fuck up every single thing Chara's done since they got here. We'll start with where they hid the other 6 black boxes. 13B nodded again, her eye hardening into a determined glare. Right. Chara hid them in. With Asriel's help, Nines kept trying to dictate the perfect message to express himself to Undyne, but even then, he kept messing up. He sent in another, and another. He lost track of how many messages he'd sent after that one until Pod 153 interrupted him. Statement: Unit 9 is about to send his 14th text message on the same subject to Captain Undyne in the past half hour. Observation: according to ancient human records, such rapidity and frequency of one-sided text communication was considered excessive and counterproductive. Proposal: Unit 9 should wait until a reply is received before sending another text message. Defeated, Nines groaned and slumped over in bed, sinking into the pillows propping him up. Oh, all right. I think we're gonna get it for sure this time. Asriel said. Kmin, Miss 153, just one more text. No, it's got a point. I guess I have a habit, Nines admitted, of getting kinda carried away with things. And I guess maybe I can be a little CLI. Pod 153 immediately interrupted him with a loud ring. Incoming transmission. Statement: this support unit is being hailed by Captain Undyne's cellular telephone. Proposal: accept call immediately. She called back. Asriel exclaimed. We did it. All right, pick up. Nines sat up straight. Undyne Captain. Did you get my texts? Huh? Oh, I've been super busy. What texts? 9SS spirits fell. Oh, and never mind. So why are you calling? I want to confirm something with you. You said earlier this morning you and 2B found out where the black boxes are, right? Nines nodded. Yeah. There are a bunch of caverns deep in Waterfall that none of our scans could penetrate. Down there, there's a big room. With a piano in it, right? Undyne asked, her voice picking up in excitement. Yeah, Nines answered, wondering why Undyne knew that. You have to play a song on the piano to open the door to a hidden room. Undyne finished. Thanks, you really came through for me, 9S. What's this all about? Nines asked, just a little confused. I just needed to, Undyne's voice dropped to a whisper. See if the person telling me was trustworthy. And who's that? Asriel grabbed Nines by the arm. Hey, what's this about a piano room? Why do you guys want to know about me and Chara's secret hangout? Nines was shocked, but not quite surprised, to hear that Asriel remembered that place. The kid's memories of his past life were spotty at best. But if he knew the place, then maybe he remembered which notes on the piano triggered the door. A new voice came through Pod 153 before Undyne could reply. It drove an icy spike through 9SS' mind. That was Chara's voice? Chara. Asriel squeaked out in shock, his voice barely a whisper. And no, Chara answered, I am. Yoarha Unit 13, Type B. Chara isn't in control of my body anymore. Nines recalled the day Chara had taken over the kingdom, how close they'd come to killing him and 2B and everyone else, only to be stopped by a sudden resurgence of Chara's host's consciousness at just the right time. 13B, a Yoarha battler unit, known to her friends, such as 6-0, as lucky. Nines supposed he and his friends were overdue for some good luck, but this just seemed too good to be true. 13B, he asked, unable to prevent a darkly suspicious undercurrent from seeping into his voice. I hate to rain on your parade, Undyne, but are you sure this isn't just Chara playing a trick on us? Well, Alphys interjected, since you just corroborated what she told us, that's a P point in her favor, and she's being pretty cooperative with everything else we've had her do to prove she isn't, Chara pulling a fast one. So, yeah, Undyne said. We trust that she's the one in control now. Permanently? Nines inquired. After today, Undyne answered, it won't matter. We're dismantling their entire power base. If they do take control of 13B again, there won't be anything they can do to hurt us. 9S? Is that really you, 9S? 13B asked, a vein of enthusiasm running through her voice. Why you and 2B, you two were war heroes. The only survivors of the 243rd Descent Operation, the heroes of Blue Ridge 2. You two single-handedly took down Adam and Eve and crippled the machine network, and you helped us escape the bunker. It's an honor to meet such a distinguished soldier. Nines was taken aback by such overwhelming praise, especially considering 13B was obviously praising him for things his doppelganger on the surface had done, not him, but still felt flattered nonetheless. What's so important about our secret hangout? Asriel repeated, tugging on 9S's sleeve. Nines. That's where Chara hid the 6 souls, Undyne explained. Hey, kiddo, you wouldn't happen to remember how to open the door, do you? Lucky here says she remembers the melody from the last time Chara played it, but wouldn't be able to play the rest on her own. The rest? Nines asked. It's a complete song, 13B interjected. It isn't just a few keys pressed at the right time. And it needs to be played perfectly. Chara has it memorized, but I don't. Asriel nodded. That's right. Chara and I would always play it together. They'd play the left hand, and I'd play the right. Well, it can't be too complex, Undyne reasoned. Asriel, 13B, if the right hand is the melody, do either of you recall what the left hand sounds like? Is it blocked chords or broken chords? Can either of you remember the chord progression? I didn't know you played piano, said Nines. Played piano? Undyne let out a proud, boisterous laugh. I taught piano. I don't suppose you have any, sheet music for this song? Alphys asked. I dunno, Asriel said, scratching the back of his head, but, well, then it wouldn't be a secret song, I guess. I'll ask Mom when she gets back. She'll know. Undyne sighed. Well, at least we know more now than we did before. Thanks for your help, Asriel. And you too, 9S. Glad to be of service, Nines replied. The fact that Undyne had thanked him felt like a breakthrough. Oh, 9S, 13B spoke up. Are 2B and 6O with you? She choked on the next few words. I hope they're both okay. After all, the 4 of us are all that's left of Yoarha. They're fine, Nines assured 13B. 6O actually talks about you a lot, he added. He decided not to mention that when she talked about 13B, she was usually talking about how betrayed she'd felt to learn that all the romantic moments the two of them had shared had all been nothing more than part of Chara's plan. Yeah, Asriel chimed in. They're out doing errands right now. 13B sighed in relief. Oh, 9S. I'm glad they're safe and sound. I'd love to meet 2B myself, she was always one of the best battler units there was. But sorry for, fangirling. When you get back, can you tell 6O that? I love her. I really did. It wasn't just Chara pretending. Please tell her that. And I hope we can see each other again. Soon. Nines shrugged. Sure. Nice to meet you, 13B. There was a strong undercurrent of sincerity in 13B's voice, and considering how cooperative she was being with Undyne and Alphys, Nines felt his own suspicions recede. We've got a busy day ruining all of Chara's schemes ahead of us, Undyne said. So we're gonna let you guys go. Take it easy, you two. With that, Pod 153 fell silent. It spoke up a few seconds later. Transmission terminated. Nines sighed and laid back. This was a lot to process. 13B was back in control of her body and was handing Undyne and Alphys Chara's entire plot on a silver platter. It seemed like way too easy of a solution. But if Undyne took hold of the 6 black boxes Chara had hidden away, then it really would be over for Chara, no matter what. If Undyne absorbed even one of those black boxes, she'd be able to crush Chara into a fine paste with a single blow. 9's. Asriel latched onto 9's arm, resting his head against his shoulder. So. Chara stole that lady's body, right? Right. Why? 9's shrugged. Had to have a body, I guess. He was being glib, but that was only because he couldn't bring himself to tell Asriel what he really thought of Chara's disgusting body-borrowing ways. Stealing her body, killing Dad, forcing you and 2B and Miss 60 to hide here, why? Asriel asked, sniffling. Why are they doing all these awful things? I don't know, 9's lied. Is there something wrong with them? Might be. Could you fix them? 9's pondered Asriel's question. What was there to fix? Maybe, he said. He ruffled Asriel's fur and scratched behind his ear, thinking of a way to change the subject before the kids' questions got even harder to answer. Hey, what's that book about? He asked, glancing at the book on Asriel's lap. Oh, yeah, this. Asriel picked the book up, rifling through its yellowed pages. It's a bunch of stories, fairy tales. Human stories, monster stories, all about princes and princesses and dragons and knights. His mood brightened as he spoke. Mom would read me these before I went to bed, and Chara would, too. I actually liked it better when Chara read to me. They always did different voices for all the characters, and they were really good at it. Well, if they're bedtime stories, then they must be boring enough to put you to sleep. Asriel got defensive. No. They're not. He flipped over to a random page halfway through the book. I'll prove it. Eagerly, he started to read, and 9's patiently listened as Asriel read himself to sleep, curled up peacefully at his side with the thick book of fairy tales slipping from his paws onto the soft blankets. As Asriel snored quietly, 9's laid back. He could enter rest mode whenever he wanted, of course one of the benefits of being an android. But there was something that just felt right about letting fatigue catch up with you and lull you off to sleep, slowly, subtly, leaving no clear delineation between sleeping and waking. He was actually looking forward to joining Asriel in a little early afternoon nap, just so he could have that experience of drifting off to sleep again. Nearly a year down here and it still felt like a novelty. Just as he'd been about to nod off, of course, somebody knocked on the door, jolting 9's awake. Who is it? He called out. Had Papyrus and Sans snuck in? No, that wasn't their style. Pod, get the door. Pod 153 wasted no time in hovering over to the door and yanking it open. Flowey stood on the other side, a rusty arm from a machine life form lying before him, looking for all the world like a house cat that had just brought a dead bird to its master. Hiya, 9's. It's me, your best friend, Flowey. 9's screamed. Pod. Shoot him. Hey, whoa, wait. Flowey hurriedly shouted, picking up the arm and holding it aloft as if it were a peace offering. We're friends now, remember, buddy? See? I even got you a gift. Pod 153 examined the arm. This is the right arm of a medium-bipped machine life form. It is in exceptionally good condition despite its surface corrosion. No threat detected. I couldn't help but notice, Flowey said, making his way inside, that you were missing an arm, 9's. So I brought you one. Undyne, Alphys, and 13B looked over the killing blow to Chara's machinations one more time, checking and double-checking everything. 3 new royal decrees on 3 sheets of royal stationery, all 3 emblazoned with the Dreamer family crest on elegant letterhead, all waiting eagerly for Chara Dreamer's signature. 13B's pen, a beautiful quill pen made from the shimmering ember feather of a long-extinct bird called a phoenix, passed down through the family line for generations before the war hung over the first of the legally binding decrees. XODIESHMSW. She signed it, then moved on to the second page. XOIRSMRG. 13B signed this one as well, her hand trembling, as the ink of Chara's forged signature dried on the page. Undyne sighed in relief. No more military-grade armor, no more manhunts, no more of Alphys' inventions being twisted toward evil. The Royal Guard was once again a simple police and peacekeeping force, just as it had been under Ascari, just as it always should have been. 13B addressed the third and final order. XOIRABABHSSYRHBBXS. She signed it. And just like that, it was over. As soon as these decrees were officially filed, there would be no more war, no more military, no more hostility toward androids. 2B, 9s, and 6O would be free. And once the 6 black boxes were liberated from their hiding place and Chara's own soul joined them, the kingdom would be free, just as all its inhabitants had dreamed of for over 10,000 years of solitude and stagnation. Just as Chara had wanted. And ironically, they would play an instrumental role after all, just not the one they had considered. Alfie's phone began to buzz with text messages, push notifications flooding her screen. "Oh, hey," she said, fumbling with the touch screen as she stood up and pulled on her coat. "Dr. Gabriot is ready to bring the lieutenant to the lab F for the prosthetic work. I'd better get over there." Undine shuffled the stationery together and stood up alongside Alphys. "Go ahead, Alfie. I'll take it from here and make sure 13B files the new executive orders." She bent down and planted a kiss on Alfie's forehead, delighting in the way the doctor's cheeks lit up crimson. "And I'll make a televised speech tonight," 13B said, "to make sure everyone in the kingdom knows about them." She clasped her hands together. "Thank you so much for believing me, you two. You girls." She wrapped her arms around Undine, burying her face in her chest. "I don't know what else I could have done to make things right." Undine watched a grateful tear roll down 13B's cheek and was amazed to find that she no longer sensed any of the menacing, strength-sapping aura she'd always felt roiling off of Chara, no matter how similar 13B's appearance looked. The last of her mistrust had vanished. This was the end of Chara Dreamer. Chara hardly cared what they were giving up, lost as they were in thought. In 2 thoughts in particular that buzzed in their mind endlessly like a hive of honeybees, 2 thoughts that would not leave them. "My brother, Asriel, is alive." They couldn't imagine how, but that voice had been unforgettable. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, their brother, not Floey, but what Floey had once been, was back from the dead. The second thought running through their head made up for everything that Chara had lost today. The androids have been hiding with Toriel in the ruins all along. Chapter 50, E2B's Day Off. The grocer's shop in Snowdon was open air, meat and produce was lined up and packed on ice in quaint little stalls under the roof of an airy pavilion. Refrigeration, after all, was a non-issue when the air temperature never rose above freezing. On display were foodstuffs from all over the kingdom, including things that trickled down from the surface that were in short supply underground, such as real, not magically conjured meat worth almost its weight in gold. These displays came so rarely this far into the outskirts of the kingdom that when they did, it was practically a holiday. Toriel's eyes, just barely visible between the hood of a white cloak that had seen better days, what better disguise for a queen in exile than rags, and a thick woolen scarf, lit up as she browsed through the goods. She ambled from stall to stall like a bumblebee looking for the right flower to pollinate, happily humming as she did so, her euphoria over the diverse spread overwhelming even her discomfort with the crowds of people surrounding her on all sides. If Nines were here, he would have said Toriel looked as happy as a kid in a candy store, and would immediately explain to 2B that it was an old human idiom, regardless of whether she knew already. 2B would say, though, that Toriel looked like, well, she looked as happy as Nines in a data center. "There are so many things we do not have at home," Toriel gasped, marveling at the displays. "Look. Salmon. Cod." She gestured to cuts of striated reddish-pink and off-white meat. 2B didn't want to remind her that androids had much less capacity to eat physical food than the magically conjured stuff monsters typically dined on. Toriel continued to salivate, metaphorically, of course she had her manners, over the display. "It's been centuries since I've laid eyes on real salmon. Imagine, you two, how good it would be smoked. And this beef here just right for stew. Oh, how long has it been?" Like last night, the town looked the same as it ever had, but now carried a menacing aura. 2B kept a suspicious eye on the rest of the town's inhabitants as they milled around the open-air market and nearby town square, charting their orbits around the decorated tree that had been put up, hyper-aware of everybody's movements, knowing that if anybody saw through her disguise or 6OS, it would put everybody here in danger. Her hand ached for the hilt of her sword, the Joyeuse hanging heavily at her side underneath her cloak, a dull black sheath hiding its brilliant blade in a cloth obscuring its gilded hilt. Instead, 2B's searching hand, unbidden, found comfort in 60's or, rather, her mitten. 60 clasped her hands around 2B's. Under her scarf, her smile was impossible to see, just like the veil she'd worn as part of her uniform on board the bunker, back in the old days, but the merriment reached all the way to her bright blue eyes. "This is great," she whispered, the hushed giddiness in her voice somehow intoxicating. 2B, I can't believe you and Nines lived here." "It was nice," 2B said. "Cold. No risk of overheating." She wasn't quite sure why she chose to say that. But she did feel a little overly warm, somehow. 60 laughed as she took in her surroundings, holding 2B closer. "The ground's all white. White and dazzling. It's like," she sighed. "It's like home." Home. 60 must have meant the bunker. What else, after all, did she have to call home? 2B wondered if she still missed it. She must have. 60 hadn't had the same life there as combat units and other field models. For her, the bunker hadn't been a temporary respite, if it could even be called that, in between missions. Until that day everything had come crashing down. It had been the only world she had ever known, and her life since then hadn't exactly been stress-free. "What's all the sparkly stuff hanging off of everything?" 60 asked, batting lightly at a piece of silver tinsel hanging from the roof of the pavilion. "Decorations. For a holiday." 2B glanced at the town square again and noticed that the communal pile of firewood she'd once helped keep so well stocked. It looked pitiful without her contributions. "What holiday?" "It's called, Holiday," said 2B. It was a celebration of the winter solstice, despite there not being any seasons down here, and it wasn't for another 3 months. The people of Snowdon liked to get a head start on their festivities, though. "The people here aren't good at naming things, are they?" 60 asked. "No. Not at all. But it's endearing in a way." Toriel thrust a pair of bags laden with cuts of various meats wrapped in butcher paper into 60's hands. "Here, dear, hold on to these," she said before darting back into the market for more. 60 hefted the bags as best she could. "I think Toriel's happy to have some extra pairs of hands." She nudged 2B's shoulder. "No wonder she brought us along. Watch out, I think you're next." 2B patted the Joyeuse as it hung in its sheath at her hip. Normally her NFCS would keep it hovering at her side, ready to spring into her hand at a moment's notice. The sword's weight was unfamiliar to her. "I hope not," she said. "I need one hand free to draw my sword." 60 leaned closer, resting her head on 2B's shoulder. It was astounding how clingy she was, and how little 2B found herself minding it. "That reminds me, 2B." As Toriel reached for the brightest and juiciest of the tomatoes on display, rare tomatoes that had been grown, not conjured, in one of the few patches of garden still standing in New Home, her hand met the oversized red glove of the tallest, handsomest, and most dashing and debonair inhabitant of Snowdon. "Ah, it's you!" Papyrus shouted out. "Hello, Queen 2. Sans, ever present at his side, nudged him in the ribs. "Oh. I mean, hello, mysterious woman I have never met before and do not know the name of." Papyrus corrected himself. "Ah, Papyrus." Toriel shook his hand. "It is good to see you again." "And those two," Sans said, pointing at 2B and 60, "must be Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel." "You're Sleeping Beauty," 60 whispered to 2B. "Not anymore." 2B waved at the two skeletons. "Good morning, Papyrus." "Oh." Papyrus nearly leaped out of his favorite suit of armor at the sight of 2B, recognizing her immediately even though she was covered from head to toe. "Good morning. How wonderful to see you up. My extra spicy wake-up spaghetti must have had a delayed reaction." "Sure," said 2B, resigning herself to one of Papyrus' bone-crushing hugs. "This calls for a celebration." Papyrus cried out, dragging 2B along as he rushed home. "Now that you're awake, you can taste that dish for real. It's a masterpiece, if I do say so myself. I guarantee you, you will never taste anything even a tenth as explosive." "Wait." 2B cried out as her boots dragged against the snow. "I told Nines we'd only be gone for." "Oh. Speaking of him, where is he?" Papyrus asked. He would love to be here right now. I let him try some of the pasta before I gave it to you, and after he regained the ability to speak, he said it was the most interesting thing he'd ever eaten. As Papyrus whisked 2B away, Toriel hurriedly paid for her groceries and followed along. 2B and 60 sat on the couch in Papyrus and Sans' living room while Toriel busied herself in the kitchen making sure Papyrus unlearned everything Undyne had ever taught him about cooking. 60 certainly looked relieved to be stripped of her heavy coat and scarf. 2B had to admit, she was glad to be rid of such stifling garments herself as well. For 2B, the sight of 60 without her standard operator uniform was still a jarring and unusual sight. The only part of her appearance she had in common with her old uniform now was her hair, rebraided into 2 cascading tresses, a hairband holding her bangs in place. The thick lavender cardigan she was wearing, at least 2 sizes too large for her and crocheted with holes big enough for her to poke her thumbs through, resembled more closely an alien entity attempting to devour her than clothes. So, 2B, 60 murmured, reaching down and laying a hand on the hilt of the Joyeuse as it leaned against the side of the couch. I want to ask you. See, can you teach me how to use a sword? 2B nearly laughed at the strangeness of her request. Excuse me? 60, you're not a combat model. You don't need to know how to fight. But I want to. 60's voice cracked. 2B noticed the shift in her facial expression, the wateriness of her eyes that, she knew from her time spent with 60 as her operator, predicated an emotional outburst. 2B ran her hand softly up 60's back, her fingers catching on the cardigan. It was like 60 was wearing a very woolly fishing net. I still have nightmares all the time, 60 told her. 12H and 40D, and everyone else on the bunker. Everyone's gone. All the other operators, everyone. You shouldn't be dreaming so frequently in rest mode, 2B pointed out, curling her fingers around the back of 60's neck. Our REM sleep limiters exist to prevent us from being exposed to. 2B cut herself off. She wasn't sure why she'd said that. I know. I can't help myself, 60 admitted. Every night, I go to bed and tell myself, okay, 60, tonight you're going to have a good dream for once. And it ends up being all blood and flashing red lights and, they all died, she said, hiccuping, her voice wavering, and I couldn't even run away on my own, you all had to drag me along like dead weight. Dead weight? Was that why 60 was asking 2B about sword fighting? You're not dead weight, 2B assured her, patting her on the back. You don't need to learn how to fight to make yourself useful. The idea of 60 risking her own life, wielding a weapon. 2B had to admit, somehow the idea disturbed her. There were 5 of us, 60 said. And only 4 flight units. I wanted to stay behind, I'd just be useless to everyone, but the commander insisted she stay on the bunker, not me. It should have been me instead of her. If it was her down here right now instead of me, everything would be different. She'd know what to do, she wouldn't just sit around crying and being useless. That was it, then. Survivor's guilt. 2B shouldn't have been surprised. That, she understood perfectly. Don't let yourself think like that, she said, cradling the back of 60's head as the poor girl wept into her shoulder. Commander White's judgment was sound. She couldn't think of much else to say. 60 laughed weakly, her voice muffled against 2B's blouse. But before 2B could take in some small amount of self-satisfaction for making 60 feel just a little better, the poor girl began to sob even harder, clutching at her as if something were trying to drag her away, her fingers digging into 2B's collar. 2B found herself rocking 60 back and forth to soothe her, and eventually, 60 seemed to calm down a little enough to speak again, at least. You and Nines and everyone else have sacrificed so much to keep me safe, 60 said, and not just that King Ascari, he gave his life for me, she wailed. He'd only just met me and he got himself killed to protect me. Just like the commander, all these strong people, her, him, you, I don't understand. Why do such great, kind people have to die, for someone as small as me? 2B recalled every time Commander White had given her the order to terminate Nines, every time she'd tried to muster the will to hate her for it only to come up short, because she had always somehow been able to sense how hard it was for a leader to throw away her own subordinates' lives and condemn them to such misery without recourse. For a leader like her, the guilt must have been crushing. Perhaps sacrificing herself, beyond simply being appropriate to the decorum of the commander's position, had been a form of atonement. "I don't want good people to die for me," Sixo said. I want to be able to take care of myself and not be a princess stuck in a tower." Sixo pulled away, her eyes still misty. 2B laid a hand on her cheek and brushed away her tears with a gentle flick of her thumb. "Come with me," 2B told her, standing up and helping Sixo to her feet. As she and Sixo slipped out the back door, 2B caught sight of Toriel teaching Papyrus how to peel onions and garlic before adding them to his sauce. To say the old ex-queen had her work cut out for her would be an understatement. 2B brought Sixo to the shed in Papyrus and Sans' backyard. Inside, it was shockingly neat and well organized, with plenty of floor space. It must not have been of much use to Sans, 2B figured, otherwise it would have been a pigsty. Currently, the half-dozen bags of groceries Toriel had amassed were sitting in the corner, kept sufficiently chilled by the cool air that seeped through the uninsulated walls. Puffs of warm, condensed air trailed from both androids' mouths with every breath. She handed Sixo the Joyeuse, hilt first, and Sixo wrapped her fingers around it and slowly, gently slid it out of its sheath. The tip of the blade buried itself in the floor. "It's heavy," said 2B, noticing how much the weight of the sword tugged on Sixo's arm. "Too heavy." "It's okay. I'll get used to it," Sixo said, trying to yank the blade free while also holding the hilt as gingerly and cautiously as if she were holding a venomous snake. So how do I?" 2B took her hand and molded her grip like soft clay, prodding her fingers into a more proper position. "Let's start with this. Position your hand with your wrist like this and point forward with your thumb, like this. The inside of your thumb should pinch the grip against your palm just below the index finger. Then, squeeze with these two fingers to tighten your grip and provide power. You want your grip to be sturdy, but not so tight that it strains your tendons unduly or causes too much vibration." Sixo nodded along with her instructions and lifted the sword, smiling a bit as she grew more comfortable with its weight. 2B made sure her grip on the sword was sufficiently firm, then slipped behind her to guide her stance. "Now, about your stance," she said. "The way you stand is as vital as the way you hold your sword. Here's a basic one. Place your feet about shoulder width apart, with your leading foot slightly forward. Balance on the balls of your feet and keep your knees slightly bent to lower your center of gravity." 2B laid her hands on Sixo's hips to guide her posture. And the words evaporated from 2B's mind, vanishing like fog in late morning sunlight, as her hands moved ever so slightly of their own accord to trace the curves of Sixo's body. "And relax," 2B finished after a moment's hesitation to collect herself. "A stiff posture won't do anything for you. Nothing good, at least." She felt Sixo's muscles relax just slightly as she tried to incorporate 2B's advice. "Okay. Moving on to on-guard position. Hold the sword out, tip pointing upwards, guarding your shoulder with your sword arm." 2B leaned in closer, pressing against her back as she took hold of Sixo's hand and guided the sword. "This is, 2B struggled to put her words in the right order in her head. Why was she having so much trouble keeping her thoughts straight? "Relax your wrist," she said, "keep it in line with your forearm, and adjust your arm until you feel your shoulder and triceps bearing the brunt of the sword's weight." "Oh, okay." "And relax," 2B reminded her, sensing renewed tension in Sixo's grip and posture. "Your body you should feel loose and springy." Come to think of it, Sixo wasn't the only one who seemed tense. 2B felt as though a million insects were fluttering around inside her. "Is this working?" she asked Sixo. "Huh? Yeah," Sixo answered, her voice fragile. I think." "Did you have to learn all this stuff like this?" she asked. "No, it's a part of my programming. Every stance, attack, guard, parry, riposte, footwork, it's all instinctual, as natural as breathing." Sixo laughed. "Maybe you could install?" "No," said 2B, not wanting to dwell on how much Nines had hurt himself by trying to incorporate her instincts into his programming. "Anyway, you can install instincts, but not experience." It'll take you a long time to master the basics. After a brief pause during which she wondered if saying that would discourage her, she quickly added, but just because you're an operator doesn't mean you can't do it. 2B let go of 60 and took a step back as 60 incorporated her advice. Good work, said 2B, hastily walking in a wide quarter circle around her to look at her from the side and survey her posture. Now, cut down, and forward with the blade. 60 waved her arm with all her might, swinging the blade downward in an imprecise, inelegant arc. Like this. 2B shook her head. No. Right now, swinging like that will tire you out, and you could hurt yourself. Start out with small, subtle movements from your elbow or shoulder to move your sword's center of gravity instead of moving your whole arm. You'll get a nice, straight, quick strike out of that. It took about a dozen more tries and a little more coaching, but finally, 60 got it right, and as the Joyeuse cut through the air in a glittering, sparkling arc, 60's face lit up. 2B. I did it. It was at that moment that 2B realized why she'd been feeling those intermittent pangs of discomfort. When 60 held that sword so confidently and had such an elated grin on her face, she looked too much like 6E. Of course, 60 and 6E shared the same basic personality template, and they both had so much in common. Both were affectionate, sometimes overly so, both could be clingy, emotional, and just a little obsessive. What set them apart was nothing more than the experiences that had shaped them and the differences in their programming. Strange how those small differences, though, could set them apart from each other. 6E's affectionate behavior had always carried with it a palpable undercurrent of malice and cruelty, making even her slightest touch almost painful, but 60 could do the same things, hug just as tightly, touch just as tenderly, and all she would be was simply kind. Was it irrational for 2B to worry that if she taught 60 how to fight, she might erase those little differences? That she might recreate her old tormentor, just as 6E had wanted to recreate herself in 2B? Good work, 2B said, hiding her inner turmoil behind an impassive mask of stoicism. I think that's enough for today. Really? 60 lowered the sword, her smile shrinking ever so slightly. Well, this was fun, I guess, she said, and I do feel a little better. Maybe we can practice more tomorrow. 2B crossed her arms. Maybe. What's wrong? 60 asked. Nothing's wrong. 2B insisted, taken aback. You're acting the way you do when something's eating at you. 2B plucked the sword from 60's grasp and sheathed it, then made her way to the door. I'm acting the way I normally do, she replied, a little more defensive in her tone than she'd intended. Come on, let's. You are acting the way you normally do, 60 agreed. The way you do when something's eating at you. 2B's hand, already curled around the frigid doorknob, froze in place. As she caught up with 2B, 60 laid a hand on her shoulder. I'm your operator, 2B, she said. I've been watching over you all my life. I know when you're upset, I can feel it. She placed her hands on 2B's waist, her skin still warm in stark contrast to the bitter cold air. You're worried that if you teach me to fight, I'll get hurt like Nines did, right? That thought, morbid as it was, hadn't even occurred to 2B. You know how the first month of a YORHA combat unit's life is spent in training? 2B asked. The instincts are programmed in, but intuition, expertise, true mastery, those things have to be lived. My teachers, she went on, were YORHA units 14E and 6E. So that's how 6E knew you, 60 gasped, her hands tightening reflexively at 2B's sides. But, why were you taught by Type E units, if you're a... You figured out that the reason 9SS memory kept getting erased, 2B said, her mouth dry, was because the Type E division kept having to terminate him, didn't you? Why yeah, 60 admitted. It was an open secret, everyone knew. I was the one who had to do it. 2B's hand slipped away from the doorknob and hung at her side as she hung her head. It had been so long since she'd confessed to Nines, so long since he'd absolved her, so long since the two of them had finally been able to live without any bloody secrets between them, yet here, now, confessing those same things to a new audience ripped the scars open again and left those old wounds bloody and gaping. I'm the Type E, who had to kill him. Her tears, hot as they left her eyes, were cold by the time they dripped off her chin. 6O leaned into her, pressing against her back, her hands slipping across 2B's abdomen as she tightened her grip. "Oh, God, 2B, she whispered, resting her head in the crook of 2B's shoulder and neck. I didn't know." 6O wrapped her arms around 2B in embrace so tight, so firm, it rivaled Toriel's hugs. Then, resting her head on 2B's shoulder, she began to rock gently back and forth, the motion carrying 2B along with her. Hearing the faint sound of something inside her creaking under the strain as 6O squeezed her, 2B wondered if the lovelorn operator's chronic lack of romantic prospects back aboard the bunker had had anything at all to do with how forthright, not to mention forceful, she could be when it came to expressing her affections to her peers. She didn't seem to know her own strength, and for a non-combat model, she seemed to have an awful lot of it. Type E units don't just teach you how to fight, 6O, 2B told her. They teach you what it feels like to suffer, to struggle, to die. They teach you agony. They break you down. They build you back up in their image. It's an awful way to live, and few of us make it out intact, she said, recalling 14E, who'd all but committed suicide to free herself from the mounting pressures of her assignments, and she hadn't been the only one. The ones who do, she added, a phantom echo of 6E's mocking laughter ringing in her ears, become vile. But not you. I can't teach you, 2B said, sinking to her knees on the cold floor. 6O came down with her, still clutching her tightly. I can't make you like her, I can't make you like me. Oh, 2B. I'm so sorry for asking. 6O reached up to lay a hand on 2B's cheek. I know you did it to make me feel better, but if you'd have told me, I'd have understood. I didn't know myself, 2B admitted, until now. She sighed. I thought I could do it. Well, if you can't make me more like you, 6O pondered, then what if I made you more like me? Excuse me. Do you? 6O's face broke out in a grin. Do you know how to dance, 2B? I've never done it before, 2B admitted. Unless you'd consider sword fighting. That was all 6O needed to hear. She shot to her feet, pulling 2B up along with her, and began coaching 2B through the basic steps to a waltz. 6O led, keeping her right hand firmly on 2B's left shoulder blade as she guided her through the simple, elegant 3-beat rhythm of the dance. She'd make eye contact with 2B, but only for a split second before sheepishly glancing away, her cheeks lighting up bright pink as an awkward smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. I don't get a lot of practice, 6O warned 2B. I mean, I don't usually have a partner, so. Seems you know more than I do, 2B replied. They went on. It was a strange feeling. The lightness, the grace, the swiftness of her feet, 2B always called upon in combat to be refocused toward this, something as far from fighting as could be. It was fun. Incredible. The next time 6O looked her way, 2B smiled back at her, which served to make 6O's cheeks light up an even brighter shade of red. One slight error, one single misstep, one clumsily placed foot later, and the two of them had toppled to the floor together, their legs tangled around each other as 6O lay beneath 2B. 2B hurriedly picked herself up, worrying she might have damaged 6O, but her operator just laughed at her profuse apologies. No, 2B, it's okay. You're doing great, said 6O, still smiling. It's easier to keep the rhythm with music to go along with it, but we're making do pretty well. Wanna keep going? 2B caught her breath and nodded, and she and 6O stood up, took their positions, and began again. They picked themselves up and tried again. 2B had to admit, she was having much more fun learning to waltz from 6O than she'd had teaching 6O how to swing a sword. The two of them kept dancing. 2B, 6O stammered, you know. I always sort of fantasized about doing this with you. Really? Yeah. But, you were always on missions with nines, and you were always so cold and professional. Even if I'd ever worked up the courage to ask, I couldn't imagine you'd do anything other than turn me down. 2B wasn't sure if it was appropriate to agree with her assessment, even if it was completely correct. But I still really related to you. You didn't seem to have any friends, or be interested in making any friends, but I could sense that it wasn't by choice. And as for me, well. I feel like I tried too hard to make friends. So we were both alone, sort of. But you've changed a lot since you came down here, said Sixo. I don't feel that wall around you anymore. There's more life in your face. Last night, when you woke up, for the first time I heard you laugh. It was true. 2B had never had much to laugh about on the surface, save for her first few weeks with the first nines. Since then, she'd rarely so much as cracked a smile for the next 2 years and change of her miserable life. I miss Yoarha. I miss the bunker and everyone in it. I miss my quarters and all the pictures of flowers you sent me. I miss 210 and all the other operators. I miss everyone I ever dated and everyone who dumped me, Sixo said. But for you and 9S, it wasn't a happy place, was it? She sniffled, looking like she was beginning to cry. It's hard to believe that a place I loved, that the only home I knew, was so toxic to you. That it kept you from being the you that you've become. 2B broke formation to hold Sixo closer, the steady rhythm of their silent dance forgotten. That's the price of war, Sixo. When you're always fighting for your life, when each day is a struggle to survive, when circumstances command you to make painful choices for the greater good, everywhere you go is toxic. There's no avoiding it. Yoarha, the resistance, the bunker, the surface, behind or in front of enemy lines, when all you have to look forward to is subsistence, knowing everything you stand to gain can be wiped out in an instant, you don't have room to heal or grow. Love can bloom, even on the battlefield, but it withers quickly, dies easily. Easier to close yourself off than to take that risk, 2B murmured. I wish I'd been your friend earlier, Sixo. Sixo leaned in and planted a kiss on her cheek, her soft lips tickling 2B's skin. Me too. 2B wasn't sure if she had made the first move after that, or Sixo had, or maybe both of them at the same time, but when their lips met, it left a shock running all the way from her head to her toes as potent and fleeting as a bolt of lightning. In her surprise, 2B lost her footing and fell backward, inadvertently dragging Sixo down with her and sending the both of them tumbling to the cold, hard floor once more in a tangled heap. Sixo skittered off of 2B, her eyes as wide as saucers, her hand half clasped over her gaping mouth. I am so sorry, she stammered, stumbling over her words as much as she stumbled over her feet as she tried to help 2B up. The electric, almost intoxicating tingle on the surface of 2B's lips did not fade quickly, rather, like rolling thunder, it lingered far longer than she'd expected. Why, 2B wondered, did that almost kiss feel so different from all the other times she'd kissed someone? It wasn't a chaste, familial kiss, and it wasn't like the way Sixo had all but smothered her last night. If she had to compare it to anything, it was like the time Undine had taken her on a date. Something behind the kiss, an impulse, a hunger, almost magnetic in its force of attraction. But this time 2B felt it, too. 2B's breath was still short, her black box whining in her chest, as she sat up. That was me. I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to. Me neither. 2B let out a long sigh. Sixo. I'm glad I can finally be friends with you, without reservations. Just like Nines and I could finally be a family, the way I always wanted. I'm glad you survived. She reached out and laid her hand on Sixo's cheek. Maybe, 2B said, Commander White could tell. With a wry little smile, she added, maybe she sent you along because she wanted you to teach me how to dance. Sixo smiled, once more fighting back tears, but this time, bittersweet tears. She raised her hand in turn and held it out, cupping 2B's cheek in her palm. I love you, she said, her voice catching in her throat. 2B nodded. I know. Sixo slowly leaned forward, closing her eyes, pursing her lips, tilting her head slightly. 2B closed her eyes as well, her hand sliding to the back of Sixo's head and her fingers worming their way into her braided hair. Her breath short, her black box whirring madly, a tingle running up her spine. 2B felt the tip of Sixo's tongue gently part her lips. Sup. The mood ruined, 2B's eyes snapped open as Sixo stumbled back. Sans stood at the door to the shed, hands in his pockets, grinning like he knew exactly what he'd been interrupting. Tori told me to come get you guys. Am I interrupting anything? Frustrated, 2B stood up, taking a deep breath. "I'm going to kill you," she told him. Sans kept smiling as he led the two androids back into the house. Outside, the sky was already beginning to darken. Shocked at how quickly time had passed without her noticing, 2B felt a pressing urge to check in on Nines and let him know she was all right. Papyrus and Toriel were standing in the living room, their eyes glued to the television, when 2B and 6O returned with Sans in tow. Papyrus had a pad of paper and a pencil in his hands and was furiously scribbling notes. There was an inscrutably confused look on Toriel's face that seemed to hold 1,000 conflicting, contradictory emotions. As 2B drew closer, she heard the voice emanating from the TV before she could see the screen, and what she heard was none other than Chara Dreamer. "Cost of our war filling our hospitals, taxing our physicians to their limit," Chara said. "I have seen this morning a premonition of the grim fate awaiting our bravest soldiers. 1 in 5 of our Royal Guard has been crippled after the events of last night. 1 in 5 maimed, mutilated. I can no longer bear to see my people suffer. Henceforth, I have signed 3 new executive orders, effective immediately." On the television screen, Chara stood at an elegantly carved oaken podium on the same stage where, just weeks ago, they had slaughtered their father. They wore the same outfit they had worn when 2B had first encountered them in that sparse battleground within her mind, a white chiton and sleeveless tunic sewn from violet silk, the Delta rune stitched in white fabric across their chest. A silver tiara circled their forehead, and covering their right eye was a single yellow flower, the other scarlet eye gazed out wearily. "First, I hereby announce the official end of the second human-monster war begun by my late father. Second, the Royal Guard will no longer be a military organization, and will be reverted back to a peacekeeping and law enforcement office. All authorization for the use of military-grade equipment is hereby rescinded, and all new recruits from the Military Expansion Act, including those from the Mechanized Regiment, are hereby dismissed from their positions with back pay and severance. Third, I am repealing the Android Bounty Act, the ban on the possession of human souls, and the ban on the possession of Yoarha black boxes. The events of last night have made it clear that no army can match in might the androids we have declared our enemy. We must learn to live with them and compromise with them for the glory of monster kind. Tonight," Chara said, "I announce the end of an era of foolishness, and urge you all to welcome a new era of peaceful cooperation and co-prosperity. In this brave new world, mortals must do what angels cannot." 2B was shocked by what she was hearing. Papyrus' jaw dropped, unhinging from his skull and falling straight to the floor. Toriel looked on, dumbfounded. For a few seconds, utter silence filled the house. 6O was the first to speak up. "We're free. Check the description for the links to the author."